The world of MLW Radio never stops.
Hey boss, I need some advice.
What's up, pal?
I need a mortgage, and I don't know what to do.
That's easy. SaveWithBruce.com. It's a one-stop shop for all your mortgage needs.
Did I tell you your arms are huge today? And, that I might just need to refinance.
Didn't you hear me the first time? SaveWithBruce.com does refinancing. They can consolidate your mortgage, your credit card debt, even your car loan into one low monthly payment, pal.
Oh, that's great, boss. Almost as great as your hair looks today.
Ugh. Well, it is great. But my hair or my arms, neither one of them can help save you money. Pay your house off faster, or even skip 2 house payments. But SaveWithBruce.com does it all. So go to SaveWithBruce.com now. NMLS 65084, Equal Housing Lender.
Cowabunga, dude!
And here's your moment from the Something to Wrestle With Bruce Prichard archives. Episode 42, Jim Cornette.
A bachelor party.
Sure.
You know what we did? We all gathered.
Oh, whoa. Let me guess. We haven't talked about this.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess 2 things.
Yeah.
You watched videotape or Betamax or whatever it was of wrestling and pornography.
No porn.
It was all wrestling.
Yeah. It was like 5 or 6 guys in a hotel room. You goddamn wait till you see this match. And nobody drank.
And you were in the corner smoking dope by yourself? So no drugs, no alcohol,
no drugs,
no women.
Alcohol, no way. Yeah, I was just watching wrestling. It was watching wrestling tapes.
That's disappointing.
Wait a minute. You're disappointed?
Yeah.
I flew in for it.
This moment from episode 42, Jim Cornette, and much, much more is available in the archives of Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Prichard.
Have you or someone you know been diagnosed with mesothelioma? You probably have many questions, such as, what should I do? Where can I get more information? RGT4Law.com can answer those questions and help you get the money you deserve. Call 855-RGT4Law or visit RGT4Law.com and fill out the simple form for a free consultation. Robert Taylor, RG Taylor II, PC and Associates, Houston, Texas.
Welcome to Something to Wrestle With. Bruce Prichard.
Well, you know, that's not a rib. She pooted. No, yeah, but there's no box of gimmicks.
Rumor and innuendo.
I don't deal in rumor and innuendo. And was he there? I was there. I don't give a shit. I ain't scared.
I ain't scared of shit.
Fuck him.
Cue, Bruce.
I love you take the cheeseburger. You take the gravy. You know. And then double layer. You know, it's called chicken salad. Double onion.
You're nothing but an egg-sucking dog.
Throw it in your Google machine.
Goddamn, kid.
God damn it.
What the hell show you got there?
I need more. Yeah.
What say you?
Pronouns, pal.
And now, something to wrestle with. Con Bruce Prichard. The second most recognizable athlete in the entire world today. Conrad Thompson.
What happened when? What would Vince say about that?
Well,
Hey, Vince,
to the
my arms look good tonight.
yeah.
They're so big. Let's go.
Bullshit.
Welcome to Wrestlemania.
World title now.
Welcome to Something to Wrestle With.
Something to wrestle with.
Something to wrestle with. Bruce Prichard. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Something to Wrestle With. Bruce Prichard. Bruce, what's going on, man? How are you?
I am doing all right, man. Just sitting here in beautiful Tampa Bay, Florida, and you know what? We're good.
Well, before we get into our topic, the man of the hour, Mr. Bobby the Brain Heenan himself, I guess we should touch on last week's episode. It's Unforgiven 1999. We got lots of feedback coming out of this, but the really big thing that happened this week is Tony and I discussed his year in the WWF. And one of the things we discussed on that show was talking about whether or not Vince McMahon had a portrait of himself in his den. And there's been lots of rumor and innuendo out there that he was shirtless and on horseback and all kinds of craziness. Well, then, of course, we talked about how eccentric he was these days and that he actually had a T-Rex on the office wall inside Titan Towers. A T-Rex head, rather, a skull. So that kind of went viral this week because someone found a picture of Vince from Sports Illustrated in March of 1991 where he's, I don't know, in a tracksuit with high tops and a giant dog below him, and up above his head, a portrait of himself. Did you see this? What can you tell us about it? Smarten us up about this portrait of Vince McMahon.
I think I was actually there when the picture was taken. No, I don't. The stuff he was wearing was the Zero Boogie line of clothing that was the product of the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. And that was something to combat Zubaz and for Vince to have his own World Bodybuilding Federation line of clothing. And that is what he was wearing, one of those damn Zero Boogie outfits. The other thing was the dog in the picture. And, man, bless his heart, he never got to come into the house. He got to come into the house, but he never got to come into like the living room where we were or come into the dining room where we were. So that was the funniest part of the picture for those of us that knew that he actually had Tiger in the. I think that was Tiger. I'm pretty sure that was Tiger in the picture.
Well, tell us what you remember about this painting. Do you know anything about this? Were you kind of razzing them about this? What's the feedback? What are people saying when they come in and they see a painting of himself?
Well, first of all, it took a long time to do. And there's a painting. The same painter did a portrait of Linda that is in the formal living room. And then they did the painting of Vince, which is in the living room and the main part of the house. So Vince did it, and this guy sat what seemed like forever to paint this portrait of Vince. And Pat and I would, every once in a while go by and take a look at it, and we would do our Vince pose and things like that, and go, you need a body double to sit in for him for a little while. And it just was a constant razzing about this portrait that was going on, but it was something that Linda wanted. Linda really wanted to have these portraits done, and she obviously got them done. But what you can't see in that picture is that in the side view mirror of the motorcycle is the painter. He painted himself painting Vince. I thought that was kind of cool, but he was a little weird, the artist that did it.
Wait, hang on. There's a motorcycle?
Yeah, he's sitting on a motorcycle.
Okay. Lots of people were guessing what he was sitting on, but it's a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Any other interesting paintings laying around the house that you want to mention? I don't know when we'll talk about Vince's paintings again.
He has a Charles Fazzino, New York, huge. Charles Fazzino is a famous artist. He does like pop-up art. It's really cool stuff. And at least the last time that I was in the house, it was still up. When it was Christmas after the verdict, after the steroid trial with the government and everything. And I had the opportunity at a gallery in Houston. They had some Faustino pop-ups. And the thing about Charles Faustino was that he would customize all of these prints if you wanted it customized. So he had a really cool New York, and I it was something that I could actually afford, and I got it for Vince and Linda for Christmas one year, and I put a blimp. I put like the WWF blimp floating across the sign with a banner in the back, Vince McMahon and Titan Sports not guilty, flying across the New York skyline.
Oh, wow.
And I always thought that was pretty cool, but that was one of the coolest gifts that I ever got to have made for somebody that I thought was pretty neat. And then later on, I got somebody a podcast championship belt that I thought was kind of neat.
Those are pretty cool gifts, I gotta say.
Yeah.
Well,
so it was neat. And he did one for me with the city of Houston and landmarks around the city of Houston, and put basically my debut in the Summit with the logo there. Did one up for me as well, which was pretty damn neat. And I had that one in my office.
When you get home, you got to tweet out a picture of that. That's pretty fun.
I will do it. I can do that.
So let's tell you kind of what we got going on behind the scenes, boys and girls. If you're not familiar, we've moved the poll over to Facebook, and we're doing that to try to expose the show to a new audience. And as luck would have it, we've got more new listeners now than ever before. And thank you guys for checking us out. Please tell your friends, leave us a review on iTunes. Every little bit helps. But we're trying to grow our Facebook actively. So we've encouraged you. We've thrown down the gauntlet. Hey, help us get a certain number of likes on here, and we'll throw you a bonus show. SummerSlam 1991 will be the first bonus show that we give you guys. We're trying to get to 30,000 likes on Facebook in order to make that happen. We're going to go in order. If you can help us get 40,000, we're going to get you another show. That's going to be Survivor Series 1991. And then, of course, the next two, if we get to 50,000, we're going to bonus you 2 shows for 50,000. And those will be Tuesday in Texas and the 1992 Royal Rumble. Bruce was not there, so we're going to just do something kind of fun like we did for Beyond the Mat. We'll encourage you to watch the show with us. Bruce and I will give you alternate commentary. We've had a great time doing that, and I hope we get to do it again. Bruce, any other words of encouragement we can throw to our listeners to go ahead and like us on Facebook? I know you've been pretty active with some Facebook Live business over there these days.
You know, I love to go on Facebook every once in a while. If you follow my Twitter and you follow us on Facebook, then by God, every once in a while, you're going to see hey, I'm going live in 5 minutes. And I usually hang out for 30 minutes to an hour answering all your questions. And it's a lot of fun to see what folks actually show up in the questions that you ask. So that's going to be kind of a regular thing from time to time. It's a regular thing from time to time, if that actually makes sense. But we'll be doing that over on Facebook, and that's on our page, Something to Wrestle. So go over there and check us out, like us, and by God, we'll reach those bonus shows before you even know it. And, I'm excited. We're going to Detroit. Jim Cornette's going to be with me in Detroit, and I have no idea what the hell to expect with Cornette these days. You know, he's crazier than a pet coon.
I do actually know that. And you're going to have a great time. Trust me, our live shows are something you've got to see to believe. And tickets are on sale now to catch Jim and Bruce in Detroit. I will not be there. This is going to be the Bruce Prichard and Jim Cornette show. It's going to be hilarious. You don't want to miss it. If you haven't already, pick up tickets right now at boxofgimmicks.com. You're going to have a great time. But don't take my word for it.
Something to Wrestle With Live is coming to Detroit a week from Sunday, October 8th at the St. Andrews Hall in Detroit.
So I went to the show in Los Angeles, and it was unreal.
The one in Baltimore before the Extreme Rules show. Yeah, it was awesome. It was a great experience.
God damn!
Excuse me, sir. I'm trying to do a commercial for Something to Wrestle With Live with Bruce Prichard.
He's a heel!
Something to Wrestle With Live is coming to Detroit a week from Sunday, October 8th at the St. Andrews Hall in Detroit.
I did the VIP meet and greet, so I thought that was really cool. We got to show up early and got to hang out with Bruce and Conrad for a little bit beforehand.
The show was amazing. The surprise guests were awesome. Come out of a box, you're over, mother...
Nope.
Completely hilarious. The part, hands down, had to be the meet and greet.
Start to finish, the whole show was a blast.
Tweeted out what a blast it was.
I don't want anybody touching my shit.
Excuse me, sir. No one's...
Go through your shit.
No one's touching your stuff.
Touching my
I don't know.
Motherfuckers.
Nope.
Talk to me. Just talk to me.
Sir.
Oh my God. I'm freaking out. Just talk to me. Pull my
you need to leave.
Up, right to the goddamn
you need
door.
to go.
Get my shit out. Put my shit in my car right there. And I walk through the goddamn hallway.
Something to Wrestle With Live is coming to Detroit Sunday, October 8th at 1 p.m. at the St. Andrews Hall with special guest Jim Cornette. A week from Sunday. Tickets for this and other upcoming Something to Wrestle With live shows are available at boxofgimmicks.com. Sunday, October 8th at 1 p.m. at the St. Andrews Hall with special guest Jim Cornette.
Have you or someone you know been diagnosed with mesothelioma? You probably have many questions, such as, what should I do? Where can I get more information? RGT4Law.com can answer those questions and help you get the money you deserve. Call 855-RGT4Law or visit RGT4Law.com and fill out the simple form for a free consultation. Robert Taylor, RG Taylor II, PC and Associates, Houston, Texas.
All right, Bruce, before we get going, we need to remind everybody that there's no poll this week. We have actually promised you for quite a while now that we were going to cover the 20th anniversary of In Your House Bad Blood. That's what we're going to be covering next week. That went down October 1997. Next Thursday, the 5th of October, will be the 20-year anniversary. And this show's notable for a lot of reasons. This is the last pay-per-view before the Montreal Screwjob. This is the very first Hell in a Cell with Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. And of course, it's the debut of maybe one of your favorite creations of all time, Kane. Isn't that right, Bruce?
The man that will be Johnson City mayor, by God. Yes, it is. And this was a culmination. So many things that came out of Bad Blood. This is where, Kane was born, but it was the kind of the launching off point for so many things that took place for years and years and years to come. And you look back on it and go, holy cow, hard to believe how long ago that it truly was. 20 years? Really?
20 years next Thursday. Tune in next Friday. And I want to go ahead and give you a heads up. We had lots of feedback about our tribute song that opened last week's episode, Unforgiven 99. Matt Kuhn put together a very touching musical tribute to Bobby the Brain Heenan, and we're going to go ahead and dedicate the rest of this show to memories of working with Bobby the Brain. We did have a few requests. Hey man, I wish there was a video to go with this awesome musical tribute you guys put together. It's there. It's at one place right now. It's facebook.com/something to wrestle. Go check it out. Even if you're not a Facebook fan, you're going to want to see this video. Our boy Chris McDonald, KDog96 on Twitter, hooked it up. And of course, the audio you heard last week, but seeing the video with it is something else. Did you have a chance to see the video? Did you do a sneak peek, Bruce?
I did.
What'd you think?
It's been a hard week. I thought it was excellent. I mean, it's a tearjerker, guys. Watch it alone and cry your heart out, cry your eyes out, go for it. But it was extremely touching. I thought they did a great job, and yes, I did watch it and beat me up for a while.
Well, we're going to try to talk about some happier times, and then we'll circle back around and talk about more recent happenings. But first, Raymond Lewis Heenan was born on November 1st, 1944 in Chicago, Illinois. Bobby's dad didn't stick around very long after Bobby was born, so he was raised by his grandmother and his mother. And Bobby was fascinated with wrestling at a young age and wound up dropping out of school in junior high. He always wanted to be in the wrestling business. Is that the way you remember hearing it, Bruce?
Bobby used to watch wrestling with his grandmother, and he loved it. He loved the spectacle of it. And he was grew up in Indiana. So in Indianapolis, in Indiana, Dick the Bruiser was the big baby face, and he was the man that was on every single week on Saturday on television. And Bobby just wanted to be a part of it some way, somehow. And like a lot of the people that in that era, it was very difficult to break into the wrestling business. So Bobby just started hanging out and doing everything that he could do, whether it was take jackets or sell cokes, whatever it is that he could do to be around the wrestling business. He lied about his age, told him he was older than he was, and he just was that kid that started running and going and getting cigarettes for Dick the Bruiser and running errands for Dick the Bruiser, found out where Bruiser lived, and would always be around and hang out and do whatever it it was that he could do just to be around wrestling.
Now, of course, there's a lot of history that Bobby has in the professional wrestling business before you ever met him. Did you ever talk to Bobby about his time as an in-ring competitor?
Yeah, it was that's what Bobby really wanted to do. Bobby wanted to be in the ring. He wanted to be a wrestler, but Bobby's true talent, well, I'm not going to say that was his true talent, because Bobby Heenan in the ring was probably one of the greatest workers ever to lace up a pair of wrestling boots. And people forget that because he was such a great manager. And he didn't always get to go out and perform as a worker and as a wrestler. And people just saw him as the brain and the manager behind the workers. But Bobby broke in originally as a wrestler. And he would go in and he would be beautiful Bobby, whatever it was that he could do. But then they quickly found out that he had the gift of gab. Bobby was a natural smartass. He loved to piss people off. He was a natural prankster. So he was always pulling jokes on people, and he loved to get a rise out of people. So the promoters, Dick the Bruiser in particular, was like, hey, kid, you know what? You're a little too small to be taken seriously in the ring, but we're going to put you and have you be a mouthpiece for some of these guys. And he started off Guy Mitchell, who was later on Jerry Valiant. And he managed him. He managed some other guys there in Indianapolis. He managed Blackjack Lanza there, Ernie Ladd. I mean, you name it. It was a who's who. But they quickly found out that, hey, Bobby can talk his ass off, and he could talk people into the building, which that was the art. So in addition to that, Bobby also could bump his ass off. Bobby loved to bump, loved to get color, and did all of it better than anybody else.
If you're not already in the loop, Bobby has a couple of great books out there that were written by a great friend of the show that I really recommend. You know, one of the more informative books at the time when wrestling books were really, really hot was Bobby's book. And maybe the book Chair Shots is the one I enjoyed the most. It's called Chair Shots and Other Obstacles, Winning Life's Wrestling Matches. This is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere else you might enjoy books. Do you recall having an opportunity to crack open a couple of his books?
I read them both and enjoyed the hell out of them and I believe it was Steve Anderson who was the author.
Yeah, the one and only Steve Anderson on Twitter, if you'd like to follow him there.
Well, and somebody wrote on Twitter this week about how, Steve Anderson was his writer. He wrote his Hall of Fame speech. And no, he didn't. Steve Anderson is a great writer. And the beauty of Steve Anderson's writing was that he was able to capture the essence of Bobby the Brain Heenan in those books. So my hat's off to him. I thought that he did an excellent job with the books because it sounded like it was coming from Bobby Heenan.
If you'd like to check it out, the other book is called Bobby the Brain, Wrestling's Bad Boy Tells All. So those are the two titles. Chair Shots and Other Obstacles, Winning Life's Wrestling Matches is from 2004. 2007, we got Bobby the Brain, Wrestling's Bad Boy Tells All. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Bruce.
No, and both of them are excellent books, and I highly recommend both of them, but I did have to laugh when somebody says, oh, so it was true. So Bobby Heenan wasn't as quick-witted. Somebody wrote his stuff. No. I'm not going to say Bobby was illiterate or that he couldn't read, but I could not imagine Bobby Heenan with a script trying to follow a script. He just couldn't do it. Not in his DNA. He's too quick-witted, and obviously Bobby always had an idea of what he was going to do and what he was going to say before he ever went out in front of people. But I don't ever recall a time ever that anyone ever had to write anything for Bobby Heenan to say. It was all left up to him, and he did a masterful job at it. So he didn't need anybody to tell him what to do.
If you just can't get enough of Bobby Heenan right now, I know a lot of us are looking for as much Bobby stuff as we can get. The DVD the WWE put out has a lot of extras on there that the network doesn't have, or it's not at least lumped all together. It's a 2 DVD set. It's just called Bobby the Brain Heenan. So I recommend both of the books and the DVD if you'd like to check them out. Do you think that The DVD, did Bobby's contributions to the business justice?
I think that it did in that realm. I think that it did a really good job explaining who the hell Bobby Heenan was and his contributions to the business. I dare say that if you were to ask anyone that got in the wrestling business after 1990, that if they were a manager, they wanted to be a great talker, they would tell you that their influence was Bobby the Brain Heenan. And even a lot of guys before that, Jim Cornette and Corny and I were reminiscing today, just talking about Bobby Heenan and how the last time that Bobby and Cornette worked together, that Bobby actually gave Jim a line to say that, I can't wait for you to die, Bobby Heenan, so I can be the greatest manager in the world. And that was from Bobby to Jim. And Jim says, goes, I can't believe that those words came out of my mouth. And he passed on Jimmy's birthday. But Bobby Heenan had so much influence on young talent that wanted to be great talkers. People wanted to emulate his style. They wanted to emulate his wit. The problem was they didn't have the wit to begin with. So unless you had the wit, you were no competition for Bobby Heenan.
Bobby got the bug when he was 10 years old. He lived down the street from a professional wrestler who let him tag along and got him front row seats. And Bobby was just hooked instantly. I think the phrase is instantly amazed. And he actually met a wrestler that night on his first night watching the business up close and personal named Johnny Case. And he would later become good friends with him and a traveling companion to Japan. Did you ever meet Johnny?
I did not. And, it's so many of these guys, when you would travel and you would be around Bobby, would come to life. I feel like I knew him. I didn't. I felt like I knew Wilbur Snyder. I never got to meet the man.
Right.
I felt like I knew Dick the Bruiser and I never met the man. But Bobby, the way that he would tell you stories and the way that he would talk about his experiences with people would bring them to life. So if Wilbur Snyder would walk into the room right now, I would go right into a Wilbur Snyder. Oh, hey, Wilbur. And go right into a Bobby Heenan story. So that was the art of Bobby Heenan, being able to tell stories and bring people to life. And there were so many guys that I didn't get to meet, but that I felt like I knew because of Bobby. I got to meet Pepper Gomez many, many years later. And I had watched Pepper as a small kid, but I'd never met him. And I finally got to meet him, but he was larger than life to me because of the stories of Pat Patterson and Bobby Heenan telling me about Pepper Gomez. Ray Stevens. I knew Ray before I ever got the chance to be around Ray because of Bobby Heenan bringing him to life.
So let's talk about, the thing that really got his attention. And Bobby would write that what really got his attention was seeing the way Johnny could control the crowd. He could tell them to be quiet and they would make noise. And if he told them, to say something, they'd be quiet. And he felt that the way he, through his words and through his actions with his aerial maneuvers and things like that, would really get the crowd in the palm of his hand. And he was fascinated with this, and that kind of hooked him. So I guess we should mention here that Bobby's mom actually managed a hotel. So he grew up in a hotel, and at 15 years old, that hotel was sold, and Bobby and his mom wound up moving to Indianapolis. At that time, Bobby was in the 8th grade, having been held back twice. Something he said that I thought was kind of funny. I guess my attendance was not so good. I used to prefer taking the bus downtown and sleeping in the tents in the sports department at the local Marshall Fields rather than going to school. School was just not for me. I didn't understand why I had to know about the Boston Tea Party. I didn't understand why I had to know about a guy named Magellan. I just wanted to see wrestling. Eventually, the reason they moved to Indianapolis was Bobby's aunt, and she passed away about a year after they moved there. But they decided to just stay there. And Bobby thinks that he met some of the best people he could have ever grown up with in Indianapolis. And now, for a long time, he was regarded as one of Indianapolis's favorite sons, right, Bruce?
Without a doubt. And that's probably what Bobby considers home is Indianapolis. And that was what he would go back to and tell people, yeah, I'm from Indy. but he loved it. He loved it there. And it's interesting when you look at the life of Bobby Heenan, bless his little heart. He was raised by women.
Right.
And then he gets into a male dominated business in wrestling. He prospers, does very well. And he marries this wonderful, wonderful woman, Cindy. And then they have a daughter. So I said, Bobby, you're destined. Your home is destined to be ruled by women for for your entire life. There's nothing you can do about it. But we always just used to chuckle at that and how he prospered in this male dominated world, but everything around him was controlled by women.
It's a pretty interesting start for his wrestling career here. When Bobby's living in Indianapolis, he becomes friends with a disc jockey named Tom Mathis, and he has an opportunity to perform in a wrestling show at St. Rita's Boxing Gym in Indianapolis. Bobby puts on a mask that night and uses the name The Avenger. He's doing all of this without ever actually being in the business or even smartened up. And he's supposed to wrestle Tom that night, the disc jockey. Bobby gets in the ring and cuts a promo, and he's wearing a mask, tight wrestling pants, and boots that were actually old hockey skates without the blades in them. So I guess he was like the original goon. Not the most glamorous way to debut, but everybody has to start somewhere. It had about 50 folks there, and it was to raise money for the local boxing program. And they do a 2 out of 3 falls match. And in typical Bobby Heenan fashion, he puts over the other guy. The crowd loves Tom. They hate Bobby. And this is how he got his start. What did you ever hear this story about how he just finds himself in a wrestling match against a disc jockey without ever really being smartened up?
Well, Bobby, and I think everybody, they think that they know. They think, okay, well, wrestling's a work. They don't know to call it a work. They know that something's not right, that they're cooperating with one another. And he had kind of figured it out without anybody ever coming to him and smartening him up and telling him, this is how you do this is how you do that. And he went out and he started working. He was able to work and do everything like a wrestler because he had been watching it forever. And he had been watching it as a kid. He loved it. So he was just emulating his heroes in the ring. And back in those days, even going into when Shawn Michaels broke into the wrestling business, a lot of the old timers, they didn't smarten you up for your first match. You weren't smartened up until you were a good 3-6 months in the business. Sometimes you never got smartened up, but the old timers would throw you out there. But Bobby didn't even have an old timer to mentor him and throw him out there. Bobby just put himself out there and started doing this and said, yeah, I can do that. And lied and put himself out there and started working with people that didn't know what the hell they were doing either. But Bobby was better at it than everybody else.
He briefly tried his hand at managing a band. That was very, very short-lived. But then he winds up in 1966, dropping out of school, never finishing the 8th grade. And he does this so he can get a job and support his mother, his grandmother, and himself. So he's working as an usher at a theater, a clerk at a hardware store, a department store, a milkman, and a car jockey at the Ford dealership. And that's where he said he was when he got the call for wrestling. It's pretty amazing when you think about a guy who has such insane wit that we all know and love and think that he's one of a kind and nobody can hang with him. Homie didn't really even finish 8th grade. It's pretty amazing. Wouldn't you think, Bruce?
Oh, hell yeah. And people sit there and they look at him and you look at the success and the different things that he's been a part of and what he has done and accomplished over the years. And they go, oh, well, where'd you go to college? I didn't. Where'd you graduate high school? I didn't go. So he was able, he learned the way of life. He went to the school of hard knocks and he learned, with experience. So he just jumped out in the world. He had to do something to support his mom and his grandmother. He had to do something to get out of the house and make sure that they were taken care of. That was all that he knew. So he did everything that he could, but yet at the same time, he had a dream and he wanted to be a part of this crazy wrestling world. And that's all he wanted to do, be happy.
While Bobby's working at the dealership, he manages to get a second job, setting up shows at the Indianapolis Coliseum, chairs and whatnot. There's a wrestling promoter running shows with names you might have heard of: Dick the Bruiser, Wilbur Snyder, who you were just talking about, the Shire Brothers, and Ray Stevens. Bobby really looked up to Ray. He would later manage him, and of course wrestle him as well. But a lot of people have forgotten that Ray Stevens was once a part of maybe the greatest tag team that people don't really talk about, and that's Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson, right, Bruce?
The single one tag team that everyone compared themselves to. If you were a tag team and you wanted to be a great tag team, you wanted to be Patterson and Stevens. And Ray and Pat not only dominated out on the Pacific West Coast in San Francisco and all up and down the West Coast, they worked for Roy Shires, who was the promoter in San Francisco for years, and nobody could touch him. I mean, both Pat and Ray individually, tremendous workers on their own, but together as a team, you just couldn't touch them. And then later on, they all came to the AWA, which we'll get to, which is where Bobby finally, got to manage Ray, and just that whole thing came together, and where Bobby really came into prominence and greatness.
He also had some interactions with the Sheik early on in his career, and he thought that Sheik took very good care of him, even as a young boy. A few months in, he meets a guy from Big Time Wrestling. It's a magazine put out by Russ Leonard, and he is working to sell programs out in front of the arena for an hour prior to bell time. And then he would start selling Cokes until 8:30. So another hour and a half inside selling Coca-Colas. And then when it was bell time, he would go downstairs and put on a sweater that said Championship Wrestling, and he would accompany wrestlers to the ring. He did all of this for $5. After the match got started, or in between matches, he'd take off the sweater and go sell more Cokes. So this is a 16-year-old who's got the work ethic like nobody else. Is that the way you remember Bobby being all the way, or when did some of this work ethic start to slow down a little bit?
I don't know that it ever did. Bobby was always a hustler, and Bobby was always looking for something else to do. And he was looking for, a lot of times, I don't want to say an easier way, but a smarter way to do things. And if there was more money to be made, he was there. So to me, he was just, he was the original Charlie Hustle, and Bobby wanted to do any and everything that could get him closer to that dream and get him involved, or at least give people the perception that he was involved in the wrestling business.
He's picking up any little business he can. He's washing the guys' cars for a couple of bucks. He's selling programs, Coca-Colas, accompanying guys to the ring, whatever it takes, carrying those jackets to the ring, whatever it could be to be involved in the business. But the big call comes on January 10th, 1965. He's working at the Ford dealership, and Dick the Bruiser gives him a call and tells him to be at Channel 4 on Tuesday afternoon for interviews. He's thrilled until Dick said, "I'll see you there, Bobby," and hung up the phone. He thought to himself, my name's not Bobby, it's Ray. So he was sure he'd called the wrong guy. But he called him back and assured him he'd called the right guy. And he said, like I said, be there at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, Bobby. Do you remember hearing about this call coming from Dick the Bruiser?
I remember the whole thing about Bruiser seeing him as Bobby, and just for whatever reason, didn't want to call him by his real name, Ray. So he saw him as a Bobby Heenan, saw him as beautiful Bobby. And that was that. And you didn't argue with Dick the Bruiser. If he wanted to call you Bobby, guess what? Your name was Bobby.
At the
Not
time,
going to argue with the man.
Maybe the inspiration would have been that Buddy Rogers had a manager named Bobby Davis. So maybe Dick wanted to just kind of rip that off. Anyway, Bobby goes on Tuesday, and he's made the manager of the Assassins. And that, at the time, is Joe Tommaso and Guy Mitchell. Unfortunately, Joe wasn't there, and they wanted to do a promo with Bobby and the Assassins. So Dick got a mannequin and put a mask and a trench coat on it and put it behind Bobby and Guy. Guy did the interview, and Bobby didn't talk because he didn't know how to at that time. And Bobby has said a lot of times that he learned to talk while shaving, that he would actually practice his promos in the mirror every day. You're looking directly at yourself, and you can practice the way you want to present yourself on TV. Did he ever tell you that was kind of his trick and getting comfortable is to just talk to yourself in the mirror as you're getting ready?
And that's an old acting trick. And that's something that if you want to get better speaking in public and you want to practice your craft, you're no harder. There's not going to be a harsher critic than yourself. And Bobby did that up until the last time that I ever worked with him. He would look in the mirror and go over stuff. And in his mind, a lot of times he would do it out loud and he would go through what he had in his head. Most of the time it wouldn't come out the same when he was out in front of the cameras, but he had an idea of what he wanted to say and where he wanted to go. But a lot of times he would just look at himself in the mirror and he would almost mumble the words going through it. And if you go back and you watch a lot of times, Jesse Ventura had this habit too, but Bobby would be thinking about what he was going to say. And if you watch him, his mouth moves.
Yeah.
Before he talks.
Right.
Because he's ready for that comeback. As soon as he hears a key word or he hears something that Monsoon or somebody else would say, he's ready. He's already, he's mouthing it to himself. He's saying it to himself and he's ready to go as soon as they take a breath and he can get in there.
That was Bobby's first day in the business, and he finds himself on the road with Dick the Bruiser on the way to Louisville the very next day. He's only 20 years old at the time, and when they get to Louisville, Dick the Bruiser gives him a mask and tells him to put it on. And he says something like, "We don't hurt each other, we make it look like we do. And if you tell anybody what's going on, I'll break your legs, your arms, and your back. And when you get better, we'll break them again." Quite a different way to being broke in back then than the way it happens these days. Wouldn't you agree, Bruce?
Well, so Bruiser sounds like he was a whole hell of a lot nicer than they were elsewhere, but that is the way that you broke in. And I'm actually shocked that he smartened him up that much, really. But that's a good mentor, and that's just how you learned back then. You kept your mouth shut. I couldn't imagine somebody surviving in the wrestling business with the loose lips that exist in the business today. Just talking about matches, that just didn't happen. It didn't exist. And so that was the way of the business in those days.
That night, while he's working the mask, of course, he's unmasked and runs into, he described as some hillbilly woman from Louisville. And he then said, "In case you didn't know, the toothbrush was invented in Kentucky. Any place else, and they would have named it the teeth brush." I don't know why, but that's funny. He says the toothless woman reaches out and actually put her cigar out on his neck. The cops grab her, and then Bobby runs back to the dressing room. So his first night in, and he's already getting burned with a cigar. And on his way home, they see a horrible car wreck, and there's a guy on the highway on fire screaming for God to help him. He does all of this, and he gets paid the handsome sum of $5. Breaking in the wrestling business back then, getting a cigar put out on your neck, seeing Johnny Valentine beat up a guy in the back, and then seeing a guy being burned to death, and you get paid $5. And oh, by the way, you had to travel from Indianapolis to Louisville. Quite the way to break in the business, huh?
Well, and God, he must have been on top to get that good of a payday. But it was, if he was in Memphis, he definitely would have been on top with that payday. That's how you paid your dues. And now, granted, 1966, different time, and $5 is a lot more money than it is today. But still, for everything that you do and the miles that you put in, it's you ain't getting rich anytime soon. That's for sure.
Well, let's talk about the fallout from him joining the business, because of course he's not making a full-time living, and he's still the breadwinner for the household here. His mom's working, but they need all the help they can get. So he's still working at the car dealer, and eventually the GM discovers what's going on and that Bobby is actually working in professional wrestling, and he takes issue with it and refers to it as a degrading profession. Bobby pops off, and the guy fires Bobby. Because he gives him an ultimatum that he can't work both. If he's going to do this, he can't be involved in professional wrestling. So he winds up getting fired. Did you hear that story about how Bobby had to choose between real life, I guess, so to speak, and professional wrestling?
There never really was a choice for Bobby. It was going to be wrestling, and he was doing everything else as a means to an end. He just was working at the car dealership. He was working wherever it was that he could pick up a couple dollars here and there just to support his wrestling habit. And the bad thing about it is people see you on TV and they see you in arena. So they think that, well, he's a big star. He's out there wrestling and in front of the big crowds. He's on TV, so he's rich. And the reality of the situation is he's making $5 and living hand to mouth, and everything that he earns goes back to his mom. So it's a tough position to be in, but Bobby was willing to take that chance because that's what he wanted to do.
So it's worth mentioning that he starts to go by Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan, and he's doing this at this point full time in the wrestling business after a talk with Dick the Bruiser. And Bobby has pretty much admitted that he kind of borrowed his gimmick from Larry the Axe, Mr. Perfect's father, and he starts wrestling right away. Now, I find this interesting because people enjoy the way Bobby took bumps, and even when you see him, in the 80s taking bumps, he is really committing. I mean, there's no half-assing it with Bobby. He's really, throwing himself into it. What I guess I find so interesting is Bobby was never actually trained to become a wrestler, right, Bruce?
No, he just emulated Ray Stevens and emulated the guys that he saw in the ring. He would throw himself, perfect analogy, because Bobby threw himself into everything. When we were trying to, we were trying to explain to Howard Finkel one night in Louisville, Connecticut, how to take a bump. And that is exactly how Bobby explained it to Howard. He says, Howard, you just kick up your legs and you kick up your arms and you throw yourself on the mat. Attack the mat. It's that easy. And Howard's eyes are just huge as saucers. Like, I don't know if I can do that. And to Bobby, it was just so simple. You just throw your legs up, throw your arms out, and you attack the mat. And that's how he went after it. He just did what he saw. He emulated it. And the fact that he wasn't trained, probably if he had been trained, properly trained, and had actually gone through and learned how to do some of the basics and the fundamentals a little more correctly, maybe he wouldn't have the neck problems that he had in later years. But at the same time, he was unique. Son of a bitch worked his ass off and was better than a lot of guys that were trained.
And Bobby admits that he was never really into working out. He didn't like it and wasn't going to commit the time to it. So because he wasn't going to the gym, he knew he'd never have the body to be a world champion. But he knew that his job in wrestling was secure because at the time promoters were pretty cheap. So he could work as both a wrestler and a manager, and they only had to pay him one time. So it wound up being a decent enough deal. He starts to manage Angelo Poffo, who many of you recall is Randy Macho Man Savage's father. We talked about him a little bit a few weeks ago. He also managed Blackjack Lanza, who at the time came in as a babyface, but then turns heel when he's paired with Bobby. And of course, the Valiant brothers, Handsome Jimmy and Johnny Valiant. So there's lots of big names that Bobby has an opportunity to be around pretty early in his career. You ever hear any stories about him managing Angelo or Blackjack or the Valiant brothers?
He, there was a part of him, he loved Angelo Poffo, and he loved being around Angelo, but Angelo was notorious for being thrifty. In other words, Angelo was cheap, but that was something that Bobby really appreciated at that time because he wasn't making a lot of money to be spending anyway. So Angelo taught Bobby those little fundamentals that everyone in the business should learn when they first break in, is to save your money and to be thrifty, just not be stupid with your money. And that was something that Angelo had drilled into Bobby Heenan. But as far as those guys, without a doubt, Jack Lanza is somebody that Bobby became friends with, and they were lifelong friends. Right. As far as all the way to the end, they were inseparable for so many years. They could finish each other's sentences and absolutely hilarious on the road.
He actually wrestled a bear with Baron von Raschke. Did you ever hear about him wrestling a fucking bear?
Well, yeah, and the whole gimmick with the bear is that it's a working bear, Conrad.
I knew you were going to say that.
All right, the bear knows how to work, but you got to know how to work with the bear. See, because the bear don't do human spots, bear does bear spots. So you can't like say, hey, Mr. Bear, we gonna go over here and doop, and then you gonna swing around and I'm gonna bam nail you, and bear ain't gonna bump for you or sell.
So the bear was like the Ultimate Warrior?
Basically, yes. You got to do bear spots.
Bear spots, got it.
And on top of that, first time that you get to work with the bear, there's the old rib that the bear. Did you ever see a bear wrestle, Conrad? You ever seen a bear wrestle?
I have actually seen a bear wrestle.
Okay, and so you see, like after the match, that they always give the bear a Coca-Cola or something to drink,
right?
Okay, well, what that is like a really, really thick concentrate of honey and Coke and sugar, and it's not Coke, but it looks like Coke, and it actually has some Coke in it and everything. And the bear loves that, and that's his reward after he does his match. See, bear don't even get $5. Bear gets his Serby sugar shit and everything after he goes over, but he doesn't do jobs either, so I guess it's okay.
Help me understand, when you're saying there's Coke in it, are you saying booger sugar?
No, Coca-Cola.
Okay, well, it's Brother Love. I don't know.
I mean, damn, you gonna get a coked up bear out there, and then, Jesus, the hell are you thinking?
I love that the idea of a man wrestling a bear isn't ridiculous, but if we feed the bear cocaine, now we've just gone too far.
Yes, you have now we're talking animal abuse. All right. It's not like you're going to put a bunch of dogs around a ring and have them hump each other. Say, hey, listen, doggy, this is your spot. But anyway, so the bear spots, there was always the first time that the guy wrestles the bear, the rest of the boys would always go by and they would get like some of this solution. You usually get some honey, and you put the honey on your hand, and when the guy that's wrestling the bear would walk by, you'd always pat him on the ass, go, hey, man, have a good match. So by the time that the guy gets to the ring, his trunks are full of honey on his ass.
He doesn't know.
No, he's just been, the guy's getting a little friendlier in the dressing room tonight. Hey, good match. All right. Maybe I'll get lucky tonight. But the bear, when the bear gets in the ring, the bear on instinct wants that honey. So the bear goes for your ass. And again, when bear wants some human ass, there ain't a whole lot you can do about it. Just go with it. Just go ahead and let him get that tongue on in there and do what he's going to do.
It's like Christmas Vacation and snots. It's better if you just let him finish.
Just let him finish, because ain't much you can do about it.
So Bobby worked this Indiana territory from 65 to 69, and business is way down at the time. He says that once upon a time they would tape like 6 matches, and there's only 20 fans there, but there's like 75 guys backstage. So as the fans start to leave, Dick the Bruiser has some of the wrestlers dress in their street clothes and go sit in the crowd. He worked some shots in Pittsburgh, and there's only about 20 people there for TV. So they have a backdrop curtain with faces drawn on it, which made it look like 50 people were there. It's an interesting time in the wrestling business. Did you ever hear about some of these feast or famine days from Bobby?
Without a doubt, because it was everywhere. And Indianapolis was, unfortunately, one of those territories that was kind of feast or famine. When business was good, it was great. When it was bad, Katie barred the door. It sucked. Detroit was another one that was kind of feast or famine with the Sheik. So that Midwest territories in there, sometimes they were good, just sometimes they were bad. And when they were bad, they could be very bad. And if you weren't one of Bruiser's guys, it could be difficult. And Bobby was lucky. He was one of Bruiser's guys.
I wonder if Vince McMahon has considered drawing faces on the tarps at the SmackDown tapings these days.
Don't have to. That's where the hard cameras go.
I'm just saying that would be fun. Don't you think? If wherever there were blacking off by the hard cam, if there were actually drawings of faces and like a video game, like Tecmo Bowl from 1985, that'd be awesome.
I want faces. Pretty faces. No ugly faces. Chocolate titties.
Oh gosh, here we go.
Everywhere. You know, you laugh at that, man. We used to do that in the magazine. That's what I always find funny whenever I see pictures and there's empty seats. That how much money that they used to spend cytexing, which was a treatment where they used to take people from other sections.
It's the original Photoshop.
The original Photoshop. Thank you. And because Vince just didn't want to see empty seats anywhere. And when they had the strobes on the flashes, or the strobes on the lights for the still cameras, it would light up the whole audience. So you would see those empty seats, and they would stick out if there wasn't anybody there. Drove him insane. But a lot of them, man, St. Louis was another place. A lot of the places had the crowd drawn in the background behind. They had like a big wooden drop behind the audience, and they would have just faces and people, you know, with their arms up in the air like, yay! Some of them holding popcorn and stuff like that.
Well, it's not so much that I like to read books as I just love the information. And Audible makes getting books in your life easy. It's an unbeatable selection of audiobooks with incredible performances. I mean, you can transform your commute and ride with Audible. Unlike, you know, one of those streaming services or rental services, at Audible, you own your books. So you can access them anytime, anywhere, from pretty much any device. I like to listen to mine on my iPhone, but you can do it on iPad, Android, Amazon Fire, tablets, Windows Phone, whatever it is that you have. Plus, thanks to the Great Listen Guarantee, if you don't like your title, swap it out for a new one. Not to mention, Audible channels give you a collection of exclusive, original short stories and comedy, so you always have something new to listen to. Right now, well, Bruce Prichard gave me a recommendation on a book that he's reading right now. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And you can get that on Audible, and you too can learn that subtle art. It's a damn good listen, let me tell you. And if you're into that movie, It, well, there's nothing like listening to it in your car on Audible, because that's the best way. You don't have to be worried about reading the word. You can listen to it. And if you ever wondered what it was like in WCW when they had all the smartest guys in the room, then read the story about Enron, the smartest guys in the room, over there at Audible. Hey guys, it's easy to do, and you can get a free audiobook with a 30-day trial at audible.com/Bruce. That's audible.com/Bruce, BRUCE, for a free audiobook with your 30-day trial. Do not let this opportunity pass you by, and transform your commute today and ride with Audible. Go to audible.com/Bruce and get a free 30-day trial and a free audiobook.
Saturday night, October 7th, Bruce Prichard is going to be in Detroit Rock City, and he's bringing his Dirty Dozen. He wants you to be a part of this exclusive experience where you get to hang out with Bruce, you get exclusive Dirty Dozen merch, and you get to ask all the questions you want, take all the pictures you want. Shoot, he'll even record a voicemail for you, record a video promo for you. Whatever you want, it's your time with the man, Bruce Prichard. If you don't know what to do, all you have to do is jump onto paypal.me/Prichard Show and drop $100. $100 gets you this exclusive experience. This isn't a meet and greet. This isn't a shake hand, take a picture. This is an actual hangout with Bruce Prichard. And if you don't believe me, why don't you trust this guy?
Hey, before Dirty Dozen, I was too shy to sleep with any women. But I got to sit down next to Bruce, and he told me and he gave me confidence what to do, and now I'll sleep with all types of random women. Thanks, Bruce Prichard.
Thanks, random guy. Now all you have to do once again is jump onto paypal.me/Prichard Show. Drop that $100 and you, yes, you, will be a part of Prichard's Dirty Dozen, and you will have a night that you will never forget.
Bobby gets his big break with the AWA in 1969, but there's already a pretty boy there. It's Larry the Axe. So he's now gorgeous Bobby Heenan, but he doesn't really dig this. He's managing Blackjack Lanza and Dr. X, who also was working as the Destroyer. I think most people know him as the Destroyer. He winds up staying in the AWA for a couple of years, but then goes back to Indianapolis in 71. And then 3 years later, he thought he was screwed on a payoff. According to the rumor and innuendo, they sold out Market Square Arena with 18,000 fans, and Dick gave the Sheik $2,000, and he only gave Bobby $600. And he said something like, if you can make more someplace else, you can go do it. So Bobby goes back to the AWA. Do you remember hearing about this falling out with Dick the Bruiser and Bobby Heenan?
Absolutely. And that was the quote that Bobby would repeat for many, many years afterwards. If you think you can make more money elsewhere, go make it. And because Dick thought that Bobby wouldn't be able to survive outside of Indianapolis. And sure as hell, I'm sure that Dick felt that he was paying fairly to Bobby. I'm sure that that's how he felt, but I also see where Bobby looking at it going, wait a minute. I'm talking these people in, and that's a gift, and that's an art that Sheik sure as hell couldn't talk him in.
No. So when Bobby's back here in the AWA, he doesn't want to be known as gorgeous. And one day, Ray Stevens and Wally Carbo have a conversation with him and say something like, well, you're smart. You're the brain. You're Bobby the Brain. And Bobby the Brain Heenan was born. And according to the legend, the Crusher actually is the guy who came up with the Weasel nickname. Is that the way you heard it, Bruce?
Yeah, he used to sing Pop Goes the Weasel. And the way, and I want to say it was Crusher, but the way I'd always heard it was that Alfred Hayes, Lord Alfred Hayes, used to sing in the car and in between towns, and Alfred Hayes would sing the Pop Goes the Weasel song. Pop goes the weasel. And that's how it kind of developed. And then Crusher called Bobby a weasel, and it just picked up. I mean, anything that Crusher did, especially in Chicago, Milwaukee, good God, it was over. Some bitch sang a polka and would bring the house down.
So he's back here in July of 74 in the AWA, managing his idol in the business, Ray Stevens, and of course, Nick Bockwinkel. And I think a lot of people over the last few weeks have had a lot of fun posting pictures of Nick Bockwinkel and Bobby Heenan. There's a fun story about the AWA World Title, which at the time, of course, Nick Bockwinkel had. It had a little bit of a nickname. Smarten everybody up about the nickname, Bruce.
I have no idea. What the hell are you talking about?
Well, it's the Inmate Belt. It was made by inmates in the prison in Denver.
Oh God.
And that
is true.
It was huge because it was supposed to be bigger than the NWA. Isn't that the way you remember it?
That is true. Yeah. I don't ever remember anybody calling it the Inmate Belt. Maybe they did in the AWA, but I do remember Vern wanting his belt to be bigger.
Yeah.
And we got a bigger belt, so our champion is better than their champion. The bigger the belt, the bigger the champion. So that was, yes, that part is true. And they did have inmates make the damn thing.
Well, the NWA kind of followed suit because when Crockett Promotions ordered a new world championship, they wanted it to be bigger than the Inmate Belt, and the Big Gold was born. And somewhere along the way, there was a comment from Nick, according to Bobby, where he says something like, isn't this awfully big? And then Bobby said something like, Nick, you could be wearing a license plate, which I think is hilarious considering it's the Inmate Belt.
And Bobby and Nick were together for so many years, and Nick is this highly educated, very proper guy, and his wife Darlene, oh my God, just a class act. She was cool as shit too. But Nick, they were the original Odd Couple, because Nick was proper and just everything had to be just so, and then Bobby was Bobby. Uneducated and quick wit and would tear people up in a heartbeat, but they melded together. They meshed well. and they were the perfect team because Bobby would go out, and Nick wasn't a bad promo, but Bobby made Nick, in my opinion, that package was perfect for the AWA.
He tells a story in one of his books that once upon a time he was in North Dakota at a Budgetel hotel, and there's a bunch of heels and baby faces playing cribbage together when all of a sudden a bunch of civilians walk by. So in order to keep kayfabe, these guys just start working with each other, throwing working punches, hitting each other with a cribbage board, and the Crusher takes a bump just to keep kayfabe. Do you remember ever finding yourself in a similar situation where you're a heel and you're talking to a baby face and a civilian walks by and you have to immediately shift gears?
Yes, but not to the point where I'm going to be taking bumps in the back. No, Bobby also had the best saying for that too, because, you would be backstage and you would be talking, a heel and a baby face talking, and maybe a janitor would walk by and guys go, "Oh, kayfabe." And Bobby's response to that in later years was, "Look at him. Who's going to believe him?" And it was true. You got one guy. He's got, 2 teeth and 50 cents if he rubbed, everything that he has on his body together. Who's going to believe him? Oh, yeah, Bobby Heenan was backstage talking to Vern Gagne. They'd never believe that.
Let's talk about 1975. There's a show in Chicago, and it's been reported this maybe was a cause of a lot of Bobby's paranoia, because even when he was on Nitro, Tony Schiavone has said that he was so old school and worried about the heat from fans and being attacked by fans that he would sprint to the car. The idea being, before you ever go out to call Nitro, you have your bags completely packed and in the car, and you had backed in to where you could just drive straight out and get right out of there, with the idea that as soon as the show's over, you go straight to the car and try to get out of there before any of the fans have an opportunity to get around to that side of the building. And some of that comes from on January 25th, 1975 in Chicago, someone shot at Bobby, but they missed, but 5 others were injured. Do you remember hearing about this, and how commonplace was it back in the day for fans to pull guns?
Unfortunately, it was all too commonplace, and I do remember that. Bockwinkel was involved because years later, Nick Bockwinkel was in Houston doing an interview when the original Sheik came out, and Bockwinkel had a lot of heat, but the Sheik had a stick, and he just slapped the stick on the platform, and it sounded like a gunshot going off in the building, and Bockwinkel seriously almost crapped himself. The only time I saw Nick really shook up, because he had been shot at, he and Bobby had been shot at in Chicago, and the sound of guns just really terrified the hell out of him. But a good heel and someone back in those days, people took it seriously, and they didn't like their favorites to get cheated, especially by some weasel manager with bleached blonde hair that couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag.
Bobby winds up leaving the AWA in 79 when Blackjack asks him to come to Atlanta with him. So when he makes it down to the Atlanta territory, he actually winds up with his first version of the Heenan family, with Killer Carl Cox, Mass Superstar, and Dr. Judo. But Bobby says at the time, there was not a lot of money in Atlanta. Ole Anderson is the guy with the book, and Bobby says nobody liked him. He, in fact, described him as the kind of guy with a size 10 foot, but a size 9 shoe. He worked from January to November without a single day off, and then he decided, I think I'm going to go back to the AWA. Do you remember hearing any stories about Bobby's venture into Atlanta at this time?
Bobby described Atlanta as the most miserable period of his life in the wrestling business. He hated Ole Anderson. He hated Atlanta. He just had absolutely nothing good to say about it. And he would always bring that up to Lands and go, you son of a bitch, got me to go to Atlanta. And the most miserable 9 months or 8 months or whatever the hell it was of my life. And I hold you responsible, you son of a bitch. But he hated it. He hated Ole, and he hated the South. And it was just a miserable, miserable time. And plus, he wasn't making any money. And he had like Killer Carl Cox. He had all these different guys that he was managing, but he was getting paid as if, he was managing one guy. But he still went out 5 times a night.
He comes back to the AWA in Thanksgiving time of 1979, And upon his return, he's working an angle with Lord Alfred Hayes, who most of us remember from his time in the WWF. And they wrestle a loser leaves town match. Of course, Bobby wins. And then he starts to be programmed with Greg Gagne. He works in the Weasel suit for the very first time. It's a Weasel suit match against Greg Gagne in St. Paul. A lot of us, myself included, probably once upon a time thought that was, originated in the WWF, but he was actually doing it here in the AWA. I grew up with him doing it with the Ultimate Warrior, but when you go back and you watch tapes, it's actually Greg Gagne who did the honors here first. Of course, Gagne wins the match, so now Bobby is in the Weasel suit. He's chasing his tail and taking bumps, and Bobby wasn't always a huge fan of working with Greg. When asked once if Vern pushed Greg too hard, Bobby said he didn't push him hard enough. Should have pushed him off a cliff. Do you remember hearing about these Weasel suit matches or any conversations about Greg Gagne?
Well, no, and that's Bobby working in that regard, because Bobby did enjoy working with Greg Gagne, and I think he'd be hard pressed to find anybody that didn't really like working with Greg, because Greg was a great worker. The rap on Greg was, unfortunately, that people looked at him as a promoter's son, and that he was only getting the push because he was the promoter's son.
Right.
If Greg had been 40 pounds heavier, then no one would have had a problem with it. And I think that people could have seen Greg as the champion. But Vern just felt that he was too small. And in that land, he got pushed to a certain level. But that was Bobby working. I always heard praise of Greg Gagne from Bobby and Jack Lanza and those that worked with him. They loved working with him.
So the only falling out really that Bobby has with Vern, because he says he enjoyed working for Vern in the AWA, but a real conflict happens in '83 when he's leaving to go to the WWF. And of course, this is an interesting time in the wrestling business. And Bobby has said that he had been calling Vince Sr. Every 6 months looking for a gig, but Vince would never bring him in because they already had in the New York territory Classy Freddie Blassie, Captain Lou Albano, the Grand Wizard. So they're loaded with managers. They didn't really need somebody else. But once in '83, right before they were set to go to Japan, he has a conversation with Vince, and Vince tells him something like, something big is going to happen, but I can't use you now. There'd really be trouble, but you'll hear about it. So when Bobby was in Japan, Vince Sr. passes away from cancer, and it turns out he had already sold the company to his son, Vince Jr. While Bobby is in Japan in 1983, he's teaming with Harley Race against Haku, and here's a name you didn't expect to hear today, Atsushi Onita. A lot of us hardcore tape traders from the 90s remember Onita from his crazy death matches with FMW. Haku slams Bobby, and Onita comes off the top rope with a leg drop, and the dropped leg on Bobby's face causes a pretty major injury to his neck.
And every time Onita's name would be mentioned or there would be a picture, Bobby would go, "That's the motherfucker that broke my neck."
Did he tell you the story about this?
About Onita breaking his neck?
I mean, it's probably, I shouldn't say probably. It's definitely an accident, right? There's no chance that Onita would have intentionally injured him.
Bobby felt that he was sloppy and stiff and took advantage of Bobby because he didn't view Bobby as a wrestler, and he didn't view Bobby as somebody that, he didn't view Bobby as an athlete, and he felt that he took liberties with him.
Bobby worked with this from 1983 all the way until 1995 before he has the surgery, and he has it while he's working for WCW. And Bobby would say that one of the reasons he went to WCW, and we'll talk about that later. I'm sure one was not getting the escalation in his income, but he really liked to hang his hat on the fact that he got insurance. Did the WWF not offer insurance at that time to a guy like Bobby the Brain Heenan? I know the independent contractor guys on the boys didn't get it, but was Bobby doing anything office-wise to be in a position to get insurance or no?
No, Bobby was strictly a talent. And he was never in the office, so he was strictly an independent contractor on a talent deal.
Did at that time Vince or Linda or anybody in the company make any sort of overtures about getting some sort of supplemental policy or something to help the guys, the independent contractors?
Yeah, I mean, that's been looked at for years and years, and it'll always be an ongoing issue. But for years and years, they looked at trying to do something for them, and it's just not one of those things that's just an easy, oh, hey, let's get him a supplemental policy. It's not that cut and dry. So it's above my pay grade.
Well, we'll talk about it another time because I do want to have that debate for you. It doesn't seem like the place to do it here, but do you remember that being something when Bobby went to WCW that he was talking about to you that, hey, this means I can finally get the surgery? Had you had conversations with him about needing the surgery years prior?
Well, you know, at that point, he always talked about getting his neck fixed at some point, but he had lived with it so long that he had just learned to live with it.
Right.
When he went to WCW, that was definitely a lure that he would be an employee and that he would not be taking bumps anymore. He would strictly be an announcer and that he would have insurance for his family. So that was a big deal to him. And Bobby had insurance. He had insurance for his family, but it was something that he was always on the road. He never had time. He didn't feel, I think the old school in him didn't feel comfortable taking any time off to get the surgery and get himself fixed. The old school is out of sight, out of mind. I don't want to go away because they'll move on without me.
Brothers and sisters, I love to sleep. And did you know that some people spend 1/3 of their life in their sheets? Now, the question I have is, are your sheets taking care of you the way that they should be? Because brooklinen.com has high-quality sheets and bedding at a price that will not keep you up at night. Well, they were founded in 2014, and they offer simple, beautiful home essentials without that luxury price. The fastest-growing bedding brand in the world because people just love these products. Their sheets have over 12,000 five-star reviews. Plus, they have versatile colors and patterns that complement any decor, even pink. Now, this luxury bedding, and it's underpriced. You have to try these sheets today. I have them on my bed, and it is true luxury without the luxury price. Now, brooklinen.com has an exclusive offer just for the listeners of Something to Wrestle With. You get $20 off and free shipping when you use my promo code WWE at brooklinen.com. In fact, Brooklinen is so confident that you are going to love your new sheets that they offer a risk-free 60-night satisfaction guarantee and a lifetime warranty on all of their sheets and comforters. Now, there is no reason not to give these sheets a try. The only way to get $20 off and free shipping is to use my promo code WWE at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com, promo code WWE. Brooklinen are the best sheets ever, and you are going to love the way they feel.
Bobby says that Vern didn't want him to leave the AWA, but Vince made him an offer that he just couldn't refuse. It was almost double his pay. So now Bobby's on his way out, and he's going to be working in Madison Square Garden on the MSG network. And he's only 44 at the time, but he's ready to make a change because his goal is to retire at 50. He had an opportunity to jump here with a lot of other names you might recognize. David Schultz, Mean Gene Okerlund, Hulk Hogan. These were all AWA staples long before they were a big deal in the WWF. And David Schultz, I think a lot of you remember, is the fellow who slapped John Stossel on 2020. We've not really talked about that in great detail here before. I know you weren't at the company when it happened, but as someone in the business, when you're at home and you see that, or maybe you hear about it before you see it, what was your reaction, and what were the people on the outside, on the inside, thinking when that happened?
Oh, we cheered like hell. We loved that little weasel media jerk off got his comeuppance. Somebody that never taken a bump in the business, and kind of in our viewpoint, and I say our viewpoint, those of us in the business at the time, you protected it. And for someone to call it fake and that was an insult. So you want to see if it's fake? Is this fake? Knock him upside the head. That was a victory for us in our eyes. That's an extremely antiquated way to look at it now. But it was the piece. If you remember the piece, it was an expose on the business. It was Eddie Mansfield showing, how we get juice and making a blade on camera. And it was Ann Gunkel, and it was it was a hit piece. It was a complete expose on the business on a national level, which is something that hadn't been done before.
It's an interesting deal too, because the wrestling business is really starting to get a lot bigger for some and a lot smaller for others. And Bobby said that a lot of that is because Vince made the talent feel like a star. Bobby said that Vince always handled him like he was a star. And that wasn't always the case with Vern, because Vern was a wrestler and Vince was a promoter, and it was just a different deal, a different dynamic. And he wrote about in his book, and we've heard about this a lot, so we'll bring it up here, even though you weren't there at the time. There's the rumor and innuendo out there that the Iron Sheik potentially was propositioned by Vern Gagne to go off script and keep the world title and not drop it to Hulk Hogan at Madison Square Garden in January of '84, and then come into the AWA and beat Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA title. So then the Iron Sheik would have technically been the AWA world champion and the WWF world champion. And if he was willing to screw Vince McMahon, Vern would pay the Iron Sheik $100,000. And Bobby says that the Iron Sheik told him he thought about it, but ultimately decided, quote, Vern Gagne started me in the business, but never made any money for me. Vince McMahon Sr. has always taken care of me and gave me the belt. I've made good money with him. So he turns down Vern's offer, but that would have really set the wrestling business on fire and turned it upside down had that happened, would it not?
Sure. And there was definitely that rumor out there, and I don't doubt it at all. I've heard the story from the Iron Sheik during that time frame. I remember, because we were having dialogue with Vern, we were doing shows and exchanging talent with the AWA, and I was the guy in Houston. So from time to time I would find myself on the phone with Vern Gagne and gossiping and talking about, the things going on in New York and what have you heard and different things like that. So it was, I believe it happened. I believe that Vern made the offer. Sheiky baby, maybe for to be, I break jabroni, Hulk Hogan's leg. Hack fui. I take a belt back to Mr. Vern Gagne. And then I say, fuck you, Vern. Vince McMahon been very, very good to me. So fuck you. Well, that's Sheik's version of it.
So let's talk about when Bobby finally gives his notice. We kind of teased it a little earlier that this was a little bit of a falling out. Bobby reaches out to Hulk, who he was friendly with and worked with in the AWA, and says, hey, I'm ready to go. And Hulk said, call me back in 5 minutes, because at this point they had pursued Bobby a handful of times. Well, when Bobby gets the call back from Hulk, Hulk says he just talked to Vince, and when you get home, give him a call. So Bobby calls Vince on a Friday night and says he's ready to make a change. He makes him a substantial offer, and he accepts it. So Bobby picks up the phone and calls Greg, or actually calls Vern, but Greg answers, and he tells Greg that the WWF made him an offer, and Greg says something like, oh, those bastards are after it again. And he tells him that it was a substantial offer, and Greg says, well, go ahead. So then Vern calls Bobby back very quickly and says, hey, if we're going to do this, you need to come tell me face to face. So Bobby asks if he's going to be in the office tomorrow around 1, and Vern says yes. Bobby thinks this is a little suspicious, so according to Bobby, he prepares a blade to protect himself, and he keeps his hands in his pocket the whole time. When he gets into the office, Vern says to Greg, let's get him and throw him out the window. They're 20 floors up. And Bobby says something like, go ahead, you'll make my wife a very wealthy woman. And then he says that Vince offered me twice what you're paying me to do MSG TV and manage. And he said in his book that back then the WWF managers only worked TV. And then they'd get home and be paid for every show on the road, all the house shows that their guy was at. So he'd have less travel and be at home with his 5-year-old daughter. And then Vern, of course, makes Bobby an offer and said, I don't know where I'll get it, but I'll get it to you. And Bobby told him something like, I have to look out for myself now. You have all this land and money. I want that. Now's my chance to advance myself. And according to the rumor and innuendo, Bobby says he'd finish out all of his committed dates, but he didn't want to work with Brad Riggins because there was some fear on Bobby's side that Brad, as a former Olympian, may accidentally on purpose break his leg or neck. Do you remember hearing about this meeting? Because this seems like a really different time in the wrestling business. It reads like it's straight out of a mob movie.
No, it was. It definitely. I heard that exact thing from Bobby himself. And the other part about it was he called Vince and he says, well, I called Vern and I'm going to meet with him. And then he called him afterwards and Vince laughed. God damn, pal. I wish I could have been there and seen that. Just, he thought it was funny. But he also knew that, Vern was all bark and no bite and there wasn't anything that he was going to do about it. You got to, and you got to remember, out of context, when you go through all these things and you forget about the fact that Vince had already gone to all of these old timers, offered to buy him out, offered to bring him in and be a part of it. And they all threatened him and told him that they would bury him. So there was no love lost there. He had made the offer. Hey, I'm coming in. I'm going to do this. I'd like for you to be a part of it. They all said no, with the exception of Mike LaBelle out in L.A. And so he's like, okay, hey, it's on. Let's do it. So, Vern doing that. Yeah, that was kind of Vern's MO, especially back in those days. But Bobby was fearful. Bobby didn't want to stay another day. He wanted to get out because he didn't trust Vern. He didn't trust anybody there. He just wanted to go and get the hell out of there. So I don't think that he made any more dates after that.
It's an interesting deal in the wrestling business at this time because after word gets out, what's the old game that wrestlers used to play? Telephone,
telegraph, telewrestler.
Well, Harley Race gives Bobby a call and says, I hear you're going to New York. We've been friends for 30 years. You can't do this to us. There was a feeling in the business that if you left this territory system and you went to work for Vince, you were kind of joining the evil empire, right, Bruce?
Amongst a lot of people, yes, without a doubt. And especially if you were entrenched in, let's say, the Crockett territory or Atlanta, Georgia, down in Texas, Bill Watts, Kansas City, St. Louis, obviously Bern, Chicago, and those areas, that going to work for Vince, you were going to work for the enemy and you were dead to him. So it was, Vince was making a play because, he had tried before. So he said, okay, I'll take what stars I want and I'll make them international stars and grab your best hold. So the feeling amongst those, Harley had his territory, had Kansas City, Vern obviously had all this stuff. Those guys, it was a slap in the face and it was an act of war. So if you went there, man, you were playing for the wrong team.
Bobby talks about the first time he meets Vince after he works with the company. They met briefly in Chicago when Vince was promoting the Ali Inoki fight. But when they're at the MSG show, Vince barks at Bobby to put out a cigar because Bobby had a lit cigar and Vince apparently didn't like smoking. Bobby keeps this in mind, and at a WrestleMania, I guess 5, McMahon is yelling at Jesse Ventura for having a cigar. So later that night, when Bobby sees the cigar in an ashtray, he took it and put it in the breast pocket of Vince's suit coat that was hanging on a rack. Do you remember any other interesting smoking stories? We've heard a phenomenal one on the $1 Million Man episode about a guy smoking in first class on a plane. Any other smoking stories with Vince McMahon you can share?
Well, with Bobby Heenan in particular, Bobby used to like to go into Vince's office This is funny and kind of sick in a way. But before Vince would get there, so Vince would always be late. He'll be late to his funeral. But Bobby used to like to get into Vince's office, relieve himself, not flush, and then smoke a couple of cigarettes in the office to fill the office up with cigarette smoke, so that when Vince came in, his office would smell of cigarette smoke and usually have something floating in the toilet.
That's so awesome. How can you not love Bobby Heenan? Even the boss isn't above being ribbed.
Oh, nobody was above getting something from the Weasel. He was absolutely priceless. But he would also be the first one when Vince would come out barking to point at somebody else. I saw that. You know what, Vince? I was in your office. I saw a janitor. He was smoking. I said, "Hey, you son of a bitch, you better put that damn thing out." And he said, "Oh, yeah? Well, screw you." And he put it right out on your desk. I'll point him out if you want me to. He just constantly would do those things. If Vince was in a meeting with somebody, Bobby would sometimes sit outside the office and some guy would walk backstage, a janitor or something. He says, "Yeah, you need to clean up that room in there right away. And the guy would walk in on a meeting, an intense meeting with Vince and whoever, and get thrown out. And the guy goes, "Man, they don't need to clean up." "No, he wants it done right away. You got to get back in there." The next one to come by, he would send them in until finally Vince would come out and bark at Bobby. And of course, he'd point at Lanza or somebody else and blame them. But always, and I was, I was there when Bobby did the cigar in his coat pocket.
Bobby told a story once about Vince McMahon as a teenager, probably 14 or 15. He's hanging out with a wrestler named Dr. Jerry Graham, and they would drive Graham's Cadillac down the Broadway with the top down, and Vince was wearing a red ruffled shirt and had bleach blonde hair. This is Vince McMahon that we all know. And according to the rumor and innuendo, when Vince Sr. finds out, he goes nuts and puts a major stop to that. Do you remember hearing any stories about Vince McMahon as a teenager being infatuated with wrestling and trying to emulate some of the guys?
Dr. Jerry Graham was Vince McMahon's hero. That's somebody that he always wanted to be, because Jerry Graham was larger than life. Jerry Graham lit cigars with $100 bills and had bleach blonde hair, and always had, the nicest clothes, always had, convertible Cadillacs. So when Vince comes up from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. to be with his dad for the summer, Vince bleaches his hair blonde and goes and hangs out with Dr. Jerry Graham because that's what he wanted to be. Yeah, and his father was pretty upset and put the kibosh on that pretty quick.
Interestingly enough, Dr. Jerry Graham was put into the WWE Hall of Fame this year as part of the legacy wing. Why do you think it took so long for Jerry Graham to get put in?
I don't know. And to me, I always thought that Dr. Jerry Graham would be one of those people that would be a part of one of the major inductions, because he really meant so much to Vince himself, but also so many of the talent, they have no idea. Superstar Billy Graham, they think they're emulating Superstar Billy Graham. Billy Graham emulated Dr. Jerry Graham. And that flamboyance and that cockiness and that heel persona was really in so many ways first done by obviously Gorgeous George and Dr. Jerry Graham back in the day. Graham did it in a big way in New York and California. Huge star.
So when Bobby's first brought in to the company, he is brought in to manage Jesse Ventura. But by the time he gets there, the word is out that Jesse's starting to experience some physical problems. He's got some circulation problems in his legs, and he doesn't want, or isn't going to be able to work full time. So they're going to try to find some other things for Jesse to do. So instead, Vince asked Bobby to manage Big John Studd. Bobby agrees. Their first show is in Minnesota, AWA country. Now remember how he left. Bobby's a little nervous. So when he comes to the show, he's actually wearing a mask when he walks into the back, and he put a rock in his shoe to change his walk up so no one would be able to identify that that's who he was. Bobby felt like he had never left the AWA, though, when he appears in front of the crowd, because they remember him from the Weasel suit matches and start chanting Weasel right away. Do you remember hearing that Bobby was maybe a little suspect about walking in as himself this night as a WWF performer, but in AWA country?
Bobby could be a little paranoid at times, thinking that, everybody was out to get him, but that was the era that he was brought up in. He was brought up in as a nasty heel that people wanted to kill. So now you're going home to your territory, and there were crazy things going on. Ring trucks would have flat tires, and things would go missing, and people would show up at hotels and knock on doors, and threats were made. So he was being overly cautious and overly careful, and it was probably, you can attribute a lot of it to paranoia and growing up that way in the business.
Bobby's actually wrestling quite a bit in 84 and 85 here. In November, he worked a $10,000 steel cage battle royal that was won by The Rock's father, Rocky Johnson. He's also taking on enhancement talent, and he's doing this on Primetime Wrestling from MSG. He's getting wins over S.T. Jones. He's even in a tag match with Jimmy Snuka and the Tonga Kid against Bobby the Brain and Big John Studd. And then when they make their way over to Dallas to close out 84, Andre the Giant and Blackjack on one side, Bobby the Brain Heenan and Ken Patera on the other side. I think a lot of people kind of overlooked that. He had an opportunity to work with the San Martinos. They worked a shot in February of 85, Bruno and David against Bobby and Paul Orndorff. And then think about this. Let me run through this for you. I think you'll like this, Bruce. February 23rd in Altoona, Pennsylvania, David Sammartino, Junkyard Dog, and George Wells. How's that for a team?
Ooh.
Taking on Bobby the Brain Heenan, Johnny V, and Ken Patera. That is quite the 6-man tag, is it not?
Ooh. Yeah, that's crazy. And all those matches were attraction matches with Bobby, being the manager, being forced to wrestle in some of these things. And I would say normally Bobby is probably the best worker out of the group in some of those instances, but working with Andre and doing some of those things, he hated working with Bruno. I'm not sure that Bruno and Bobby really got along all that well, but
did Bruno take
down his nose?
Did Bruno take himself too seriously?
I think Bruno took himself too seriously in those days. Yeah, I really do. Bruno's a really nice guy, really, really nice guy. But when you start talking about the business and how the business has changed, and I'm going back to when I was around Bruno in the late 80s, he didn't like the changes. He didn't like what the business had become in 89, 88.
Well, but I mean, that's true of a lot of people today. I mean, Jim Cornette I shouldn't say hates the business. He hates a lot of the changes about the business today.
Exactly. And I think anybody in anything, I think that the football players, they watch football nowadays and look at a bunch of pansies wearing pads.
Sure.
It just changes. The business evolves, and you either evolve with it or you die and you get gobbled up. So at that time, I know Bruno took himself very seriously, and Bobby was a gimmick manager and having, going out and working matches, and they just didn't gel.
Bobby's working against the San Martinos, and he's tagging a lot with Paul Orndorff. Do you know how Bobby and Paul got along?
Great. They got along great. Paul was from Georgia, and man, it was, Paul could be kind of miserable sometimes, right, be a little bit ornery, but so could Bobby. And they gelled well together, and they got along. The only guy going back that I remember that Bobby didn't get along with really was Rick Rude.
Well, I want to talk about that in a minute. We'll circle back to Rick Rude. He's doing a lot of tag matches here with Big John Studd against Andre the Giant. You've told us many episodes ago that Andre and Big John Studd just did not get along. Andre did not like Big John. How did Bobby get along with Big John Studd? And early here in 85, what was Bobby's relationship like with Andre, to the best of your understanding?
Oh, Andre and Bobby were always good. They go way back from the days in Indianapolis. So Andre and Bobby were always good friends. They always got along. Andre just didn't like giants. Andre didn't like anybody that could enter into that giant realm. Andre, I'm only giant. God, I wish I could do Andre as good as Dan Soder does.
Nobody can.
But, no, it's incredible. But, Stud was Stud. And at that time, Bobby was so happy to have a job and was so happy he was making money. Bobby didn't care who he managed. And he was just willing to do, let me do my job. I'll go out and get these guys over.
March 31st, 1985, of course, is WrestleMania 1. Well, at the time, it's just WrestleMania. Bobby's managing Big John Studd here against Andre the Giant in the Body Slam match. Of course, there is a $15,000 bag of cash on the line. And it's one of the more iconic Bobby Heenan moments when Andre's throwing the cash out to the fans. Bobby runs in, steals the bag, and hightails it out of there. It's the biggest show in the history of the business at that point. Did you ever talk about what WrestleMania meant to Bobby?
At the time, I think that everybody saw it as a milestone, and they were looking at it as the feeling in New York was this was something special, and it was much bigger than a big wrestling show because of all the entertainers and the celebrities and the media attention that it was getting. I'll tell you a funny story about that match was they had the big WWF duffel bag full of cash, and the finish of the match was as it was, but Andre grabs the duffel bag, and Andre was supposed to reach in and grab one handful of cash because they had up on top, they had like the hundreds and the 50s and the 20s and everything. So Andre was going to grab one handful of cash and throw it out into the crowd, and then Bobby was supposed to be there.
Right.
Well, Andre gets it, and he reaches in and starts throwing handfuls of cash. And Bobby can't get to him right away because Andre's walking away, going away from Bobby and just, kind of sticking it to Vince. Here, more money for you. Here's the big dollars. And throwing it out into the crowd just to have a little fun.
In 1985, Bobby managed Big John Studd, King Kong Bundy, Adrian Adonis, The Missing Link, and Ken Patera. Any stories you can drop on us about any of those guys?
Oh, God. Ernie Ladd used to say about King Kong Bundy, Bundy, every time you cash a check, you're stealing money, Bundy. You're the drizzling shits, Bundy. Get out of the business. If you weren't big, fat, and white, you wouldn't be here. But, gosh, going back, Ken Patera was one that Bobby enjoyed managing, hated working with because Ken was just so damn strong. And, Kenny was Kenny, and world's strongest man at the time really didn't know his own strength. And Bobby just hated being slung around by the neck and what have you. But for the most part, Bobby went out and his job was to get people over, and he just loved being able to take guys and make them more than they could have been on their own.
WrestleMania 2, of course, goes down in 1986, April 2nd. 3 locations here is the idea: Uniondale, New York, Chicago, and LA. Bobby's on the LA show, and here he's managing King Kong Bundy in the main event. Of course, Bundy is challenging Hulk Hogan in a salad steel cage for the world title. Of course, Hogan won and retained the title. But the more interesting thing is he was actually in the hospital the morning of WrestleMania 2 in Tampa, Florida. He had a procedure done where they shot dye in his spine, and this is because of the broken neck that he suffered in 1983 in Japan. But he had this pain all of a sudden that went from his wrist to his neck. So never any pain in his hand, then his wrist to his neck. And it had bothered him for the 3 years prior. So 83 to 84 to 85 and now into 86. But he never had any insurance and couldn't take time off because he couldn't afford the surgery and to miss the dates. He had a family to support. But here he finally makes time to do it. And he says that someone from the WWF told him if he didn't make WrestleMania that night, he was going to be fired. So Bobby checked himself out that morning after having this procedure done. And the nurse asked him where he was going. And he said, I'm going to Los Angeles to wrestle. See you later. And caught the plane to LA. After the show, he catches a red eye back to Tampa and comes back to the hospital, checks in at 5 a.m. and goes to bed. Bobby said that he felt like the way he was handled was a little disgraceful, in that it was come to WrestleMania or you're fired. Did you ever talk to Bobby about this situation at WrestleMania 2?
No, not that he would be fired. I do remember when he went into the hospital and he's told that story, it just scared the hell out of him because he had numbness.
Right.
And he had what he described as like lightning shooting down his arm, which he had never had before. He had pain and he had had problems moving his neck, but he was scared. He was scared. But, I'd always heard from him that, he wasn't missing WrestleMania. So I'd never heard that he was told he was going to be fired. At least I never heard that from him. Not saying it didn't happen. I don't know.
Bobby has told a story where he would refer to Bundy as Shamu because of the way he looked. And he says one day when they're in first class together, Bundy falls asleep and the airline stewardess comes over and says, "Would you like anything?" He orders a scotch and water. And she says, "Would your friend like something?" And he said, "Yes, bring him a pail of fish." I don't know why, but that kind of amused me. Once upon a time, Bobby got an opportunity to challenge for the tag team titles. He and Bundy teamed up to take on the British Bulldog in Long Island for the world tag team titles. How funny of a pairing would that have been? Bobby Heenan and King Kong Bundy as tag champs.
Absolutely brutal. And that's another one. Bobby did not enjoy working with Dynamite and Davey Boy, especially Dynamite. Just felt they were reckless and too stiff and didn't take care of him enough.
August 26th in Toronto, the WWF holds the big event. It draws over 64,000 people. And you would see in the main event, Bobby is managing Paul Orndorff as he challenges Hulk Hogan for the world title. Of course, Hogan won by DQ. We've had lots of questions about that. We don't go into great detail because it's before Bruce was there, but it was a big moment in Bobby's career and certainly a highlight for Orndorff. So we wanted to mention it. In 86, Bobby starts doing commentary for Primetime and All American Wrestling. Did you hear how that came about? Did he and Gorilla already know that they'd have this magical chemistry together, or is it something they just kind of figured out on air working together?
No, I think that when Jesse started doing the commentary for Superstars and they were moving away from Jesse doing the Primetime show, that they just slid Bobby Heenan in there. Bobby had the gift of gab, and let's try him out. And that's just always what I was told. And he was absolutely a natural at it. And the chemistry with him and Gorilla was, well, nothing more needs to be said there.
We did a whole show on Bobby and Gorilla. We call it Primetime Wrestling. I believe it's episode 11. It's available in the archives over at somethingtowrestle.com. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. There are tons of fabulous Bobby Heenan stories on there. Anything else you'd like to touch on about Primetime Wrestling? I know we did a whole show on that, but that was many moons ago, and you've probably had plenty of time to reflect on memories of working with Bobby. Anything you can share with us that maybe we missed the first time in talking about Bobby Heenan and Gorilla on Primetime?
Well, the most important thing to me about that entire time, when I started in 1987, Primetime was one of the first shows that I was responsible for as a producer. And here's a 24-year-old kid coming into this big company. I really didn't have a job description lined out or anything like that. And I'm going down and I'm working with people that have worked together for many, many years at Video One and what have you, and Gorilla and Bobby, who had been there, and old timers in the business. Gorilla used to be one of the partners, and they could have made it really, really difficult for me. And they did exactly the opposite. And Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon both kind of took me under their wing and brought me in and endorsed me, which, by the way, they didn't do for everybody for many years afterwards. It used to be the running gag whenever we would have someone new come in and we would be taping Primetime Wrestling in the studio. Well, we would walk people through Edit One, and they would go in and meet Bobby and Gorilla on the set. And, hey, and Bobby and Gorilla, big smiles, and hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you. And then we would walk them back through Edit One. Well, the microphones are on.
Sure.
So you would always hear Gorilla and Bobby talking like they're off camera. It's not on air. No one's supposed to hear this, but obviously we all knew that everybody could hear. And it was here where we would always find out whether someone was going to make it or not, because you would have Bobby. They would time it perfectly. Like, who was what the hell was the name of that jackoff that just walked in here? What the hell was up with his hair? Did you see the shirt he was wearing? And Monsoon, without missing a beat, would be, I don't know. Don't commit the name to memory.
Oh my
and here,
God!
Here these people are. They're coming in either for a job interview or they're just hired. So they're meeting everybody, and now the host of the Primetime Wrestling has just completely dogged them, and they have no idea what the hell to think. But it was a great routine that we did. And if they liked the person, they would put them over a little bit. But if they didn't, man, oh God, they could be brutal.
Do you remember anybody who got that treatment that we fans may remember their name?
Ooh, boy. I tell you one guy was Murray Hodgkins, who took it personal and was like, what the hell?
Murray Hodgkins, if you don't recall, boys and girls, is the guy who was on Donahue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's his claim to fame. Let's talk about the Andre turn in 87. This is what a lot of people want to hear about. Bobby wrote in his book, he didn't know they were going to turn Andre heel. But then one day at a show, Andre walks up to him in the back and says something like, we're going to have some fun, boss. And Bobby's a little confused because he's not managing Andre at the time. A few days after this, McMahon approaches him and says something like, Andre wants you to be his manager, which of course is quite the honor. But Vince explained that Andre felt like he was over and that he could trust Bobby. So now here in February of 87, we get this huge edition of Piper's Pit where the WWF president Jack Tunney presents Hogan with a huge trophy for being the world champion for 3 years. And Andre comes out and now WrestleMania is set. Bobby is the mouthpiece for Andre here because Bobby says that Andre's sick of him and what he stood for. And Andre then challenges for the world title. He tears off Hogan's shirt and catches Hogan's cross necklace in the process. And the biggest main event in the history of wrestling is set, man. At the time, but you're probably thinking you might have an opportunity to be headed up pretty quickly. At the time, did you think this was the biggest possible match that could be presented at a WrestleMania?
I think everybody did. It was, what the hell do you do with Andre the Giant as a heel? Because the aura of Andre had been made to exactly what it was. He was unbeatable and he was the Giant, and it was that one heel that Hogan would not be able to conquer. So from the outsiders looking in, any time that an audience or anybody, even within the business, you can't pick them, that's a great main event. And that's a great attraction. So we were all wondering, what the hell are they going to do? There were rumors about, all the stuff that you've heard. Well, Andre's not going to put him over, all this other crap. No one really knew. Even on the inside, people didn't know what the hell was going on. We had heard rumors about Andre's health, that he wasn't healthy. This was his last match, and then he was going to go away. Then we also heard rumors that Andre's not going to put him over. They're going to put the title on Andre and run with it for a while. It was just kind of running rampant, if you will. But the idea of putting Bobby with him, Bobby was the hottest manager, in my opinion, that they had. And you put him with the guy that was traditionally this huge babyface. How could it not be great? They were just perfect together.
Bobby wrote in his book that the morning of WrestleMania 3, he and Andre had breakfast, and Andre had, as usual, an omelet and 6 bottles of wine. Then they get to the building, of course, and they meet with Vince and go to the steam room for the Detroit Lions and discuss what's going to happen in the match. And Vince lays it out that they're going to be going to the ring on a forklift, and they'll be 7 or 8 feet in the air. And then Andre asked Vince, how big are the aisles? Vince asked why, and Andre said, well, I'm going to push over Hulk Hogan's forklift. And Vince, surprisingly, says, while he's on it? And Andre said, I don't know. And Vince says, you can't do that. There's a guy driving it. Andre says, I don't care. After the meeting, Vince pulls Bobby aside and says, if he starts to push the forklift over, watch him. And Bobby said, Vince, me and 93,000 people will watch him, and that's all we'll be able to do. That night, riding to the ring, Bobby wrote that it didn't click in his head right away that there were 93,000 people there. Instead, he was wondering how many people were watching this on pay-per-view, and he thought, this is history. Of course, as we know, Hogan pinned Andre that night to retain the world title, and Bobby has said that it was Andre's idea to have this match and pass the torch to Hogan, and he didn't think that Hogan wanted to work with Andre, because Bobby wasn't sure that Hulk actually trusted Andre at the time. Did you have conversations? There's this rumor and innuendo, and Hogan has helped perpetuate this over the years, that nobody was really sure what Andre was going to do that night. What if he changed his mind? Was he sold on the idea? What say you? You were in the back right after this, and for a lot of this time, was there ever any sort of hesitation that you're familiar with that maybe Andre wouldn't do business that night?
I think that those rumors were perpetuated and that a lot of people probably wanted to believe that. But I also believe that Vince, going into it with Andre, knew exactly what the hell they were going to do, and that he wouldn't have booked the match if he didn't know the finish and didn't have Andre's cooperation. Because if Andre didn't want to do it, what the hell are you going to do?
Well, and I think a lot of folks need to remember that heading into this, what a big part that Bobby was. He probably doesn't get the credit he deserves, because Hogan and Andre were actually teaming a lot before this. You know, you had Giant Machine and Hulk Machine and things like that. And on the opposite side of the ring, a lot of the time was Bobby the Brain Heenan. So for Andre to side with Bobby really was a big part of the angle that maybe a lot of people just kind of discount.
It solidified Andre as a heel.
Bobby said that Andre had a favorite French restaurant in Connecticut, and he said that Andre said his favorite food there was like his mom used to make, and he could sit there in the quiet and no one bothered him. And Bobby joked that they served liver, tongues, lungs, and lips. So Bobby used to nickname this place the Autopsy Grill. And he says there was an old man named Charlie who played the piano at this restaurant.
Yep.
And Bobby once told him, one of these days you're going to be on the menu here. Tell us about this, this restaurant that Andre liked to go to and drag Bobby along.
For the longest time, Andre lived at the Hyatt Regency in Greenwich. So this restaurant was just right down the street on Post Road, and the name escapes me. I've been there a million times. But it was a French restaurant, and Andre could go in there and he could sit there all night long, and they'd just bring him wine, and it was all the French food that he loved and all this French stuff. But that was exactly, they had a lot of organs on the menu. And if you like French food, I guess it was good. I was never really a huge fan of it. You know, but if the boss was in town, you definitely had to go by, pay your respects, have a beer or two, and maybe a vodka, and wait for somebody else to come and relieve you, hopefully.
You know, baby, it ain't either being me. Everybody always wants to know, how you doing, baby? You got any advice? Hey, let me ask you something. Who you got this week in the big game? Is it the Texans? Is it Tennessee? Where you gonna put your money? Well, let me tell you something, baby. It's where you're putting your money and where you're betting. It's just as important as who you betting on. That's why I always tell my people, go to mybookie.ag, because they've been in business for years. And just like me, their reputation is rock solid. And get this, they do 100% cash bonuses. So right off the bat, you making money for doing nothing. And they got the fastest payouts in town, seriously. Just 2 business days. I remember there was a guy that I used to place bets with years ago. I had to chase him down whenever I won. Whenever I lost, he was right there saying, hey, baby, you owe me a little money. And then when I won, I could never give him my money. But with mybookie.ag, they pay you fast. That's right, just 2 business days. Now, you already know who gonna win? So lay some cash down and you win big today. Now I'm only going to recommend something that's been good to me. That's why I'm urging you, make your way over to mybookie.ag, because you win, they pay. They got in-game live betting, the most rewarding player perks in the business, and an all-new mobile site.
make betting on the go a breeze, baby. So join now, and my bookie will match your deposit with a 100% bonus. That's right, a 100% bonus. All you got to do is visit mybookie.ag. That's MYBOOKIE.AG, and use my promo code Wrestle to activate the offer. So go mybookie.ag, use promo code Wrestle to activate the offer. Because it's real simple, baby. You play, you win, and you get paid. Mercy.
Any fun stories you can share with us about Andre and Bobby? You know, ribs they may have pulled. I think most people have heard the airplane screwdriver story, but there's some other ones where Bobby says that Andre would get in an elevator and there'd be a bunch of old women in there, and Andre would really rip a really loud fart and then turn around to the old women and say, "Quit it." And another time when he ran into Andre in an airport, a couple of guys afterwards came over and asked who it was. And Bobby said something like, "I don't know. I was on my way to my plane and he grabbed me and demanded I go into the bathroom with him." So these guys just sprinted away from Andre. So lots of fun ribs. Any other ribs you remember about Bobby and Andre? It feels like this would have been a hilarious trip.
No, it was constant. And then, you know, Andre wore these shoes, and Bobby used to call them his Herman Munsters because it looked like those big shoes that Herman Munster used to wear on the Munsters. So this one night they had been out all night drinking an excessive amount. And, you know, Bobby joked in his Hall of Fame speech about Flair not being very good for his liver. But Andre, before that, did a lot of damage to Bobby's liver. And he's about going out, and Andre being actually almost drunk. Now, you can imagine how much alcohol a giant has to drink to be almost drunk. And so he says, because Andre walks out, and he steps out onto the curb, and all of a sudden he just, and he said that he spewed vomit all the way across the street. And when he looked down at his Herman Munsters, there was a couple of pieces of giant vomit on the Herman Munsters. He said that Andre just kind of reached down and goes, better second time. But he said that the puke stayed on the Herman Munsters for days after. And he said, it would just totally skeeve him out, because every time he would get on a plane or see Andre in the morning, he would look down at his shoes and still see a little bit of giant puke on them.
We should mention that I realize the connection with Bruce is not strong right now. We're not in our normal circumstance. Bruce is in Tampa to attend Bobby's funeral tomorrow. So by the time you're listening to this, if you're listening to it as soon as it's posted, Bruce is there. And this is the best we can do. So we've had kind of an off-air run here for about an hour trying to get us back up and running. He's in a hotel in Tampa, so it's just a really tough deal for us tonight. So we apologize that we don't have the normal quality that you're used to, but we're trying to bring you this story as soon as we can and as completely as we can. Bobby is all over the place in 1987 with the WWF. For the second big pay-per-view, of course, the Survivor Series, and I'm sure we'll cover that here in a couple of months. Bobby is all over this show. He's there ringside for the very first match in Survivor Series history. He's managing Harley Race and Hercules. They're teaming with Honky Tonk Man, Danny Davis, and Ron Bass to take on Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, Jake Roberts, Jim Duggan, and Brutus the fucking Barber Beefcake. Of course, Savage, Roberts, and Steamboat win the match. Later on, he's back out there again, this time managing the Islanders. They're teaming with Valentine and Dino Bravo, the Hart Foundation, and Demolition, and the Bolsheviks. This is quite the squad here. They're taking on Strike Force, British Bulldogs, Young Stallions, Killer Bees, and the fabulous Rougeau brothers. Of course, the Bees and Stallions win the match. And then in the main event, he's managing Andre the Giant, Rick Rude, and King Kong Bundy. They're teaming with Butch Reed and the One Man Gang to take on Hogan, Bigelow, Patera, Orndorff, and Morocco. Andre is the winner of the match. I'm sure we'll cover this in long form at some point in the future. What can you tell us about Survivor Series 1987 and Heenan's involvement? He's all over the show.
Well, Bobby was all over all of the shows, and Bobby used to joke, just how many times he would have to get up and go back and forth. But he had so many people, and Bobby was the manager that if you wanted to get somebody over, you put him with Bobby Heenan. And Bobby also had announcing duties. So he just was like dog shit. He was everywhere. And that was the price that you had to pay for being Bobby Heenan.
We touched on it a little earlier today, and certainly we talked about it on our Rick Rude episode, which is available in the archives. But we touched on there that Rude and Bobby weren't really that close, and Rude maybe thought that Bobby was trying to steal his heat. What can you tell us about Rude and Bobby's relationship that we haven't already discussed on the show?
Well, for the most part, as far as Rick Rude's career, he had always been on his own, with the exception of Percy Pringle early on in his career was his manager. But when he came to the WWF with Bobby as his manager, Rude just felt that because the people reacted to Bobby Heenan. If Bobby turned his head one way, the crowd reacted. And Rick felt that Bobby was trying to steal his heat, and Bobby was trying to take the match, take away from the match by his antics on the outside. But the fact of the matter was Bobby was just doing his job. And I think that the Ultimate Warrior kind of perpetrated a little bit of that as well, to say, hey, man, he's stealing our heat in the match. And they just didn't really get along. Two different kind of guys.
In 88, Bobby sold Andre the Giant's contract to Ted DiBiase. I'm curious, why do you think that was decided? Bobby's a classic manager. He's doing real well with Andre. Is this strictly to involve the DiBiase storyline of buying the belt? And why don't you think Bobby could have been involved in that angle?
Well, because it was to get the $1 Million Man over. That's all it was all about. And it was just storyline purposes at that point. Andre really wasn't going to be going any further in the ring. That was the plan. Andre was going to kind of finish up as far as his day-to-day and house show duties in particular after WrestleMania 4. So the idea was sell the contract, do the deal with DiBiase, and that was more to get DiBiase over than anything.
So WrestleMania 4 rolls around. It's going down in Trump's joint in Atlantic City. And Bobby wrote that Donald Trump came backstage to meet the boys, and he brought his wife and like 5 security guards. And he says that Trump was a real nice guy and shook hands with everyone and had a lot of time for everyone. But then in the course of their match, of course, Rick Rude is working against Jake Roberts in the first round. And Bobby says something like, at one point, Jake put Rude over the security railing backwards. And this is happening right in front of Ivana. And Jake goes and gets the snake and tells Rude to move. And the snake goes right into her face. She flies backwards in her chair. She's got her glass of wine on the floor and her legs are over her head. And Bobby reportedly thinks something like, oh God, if Vince hears about this, we're in trouble. When he looks over at Trump and Trump winks at him, and he got it. He thought it was funny. And, she did not. She says something to the security guard like, you should have shot the fucking snake. Do you remember this rib on the Trump family that Rude and Snake were trying to pull here?
Well, yeah, I think it was more Donald and Jake just to kind of scare Ivana a little bit there. And yeah, she did. She told the security, if the snake gets near me, shoot it.
I think,
yeah, Donald's got a good sense of humor.
I think most people remember Bobby at WrestleMania 4 here because he's teaming with the Islanders to take on Coco Beware and the British Bulldog. And here we see Bobby wearing a dog suit gimmick to protect him against an attack from Matilda. And Bobby said it was made for a guy that wore a medium and he couldn't breathe in the bastard. But it's a pretty funny visual, him in the dog suit. Any funny memories about that suit or that match that most of us remember?
Well, not only that, but Matilda wouldn't attack the suit, and they kept trying to get her to attack the suit. And so they had a trainer that had worked with the Bulldogs and worked with Matilda to try and teach her to attack the suit. And it was actually an attack dog trainer.
someone that trained Sherman Shepherds and Doberman Pinschers and Rottweilers, and try to teach this bulldog how to go after the suit. And Bobby had to get his hand down a certain way to wag at the dog so that she would come and attack him. Then he couldn't run. And getting up the aisle, and then when Matilda finally caught up to him, she didn't want to attack him. She wanted to hump him. So it happens.
All right, so let's try this again for maybe the 19th time tonight. In June, in Philadelphia, Bobby works his first weasel suit match with the Ultimate Warrior. Whose idea is it to bring this gimmick back? We talked about him doing it in the AWA with Greg Gagne, and we know that maybe Bobby didn't really think that highly of Warrior. What can you tell us about the weasel suit match? Whose idea was it to bring it back? How did Bobby enjoy working with Warrior? What can you share?
Well, I think the original idea to bring the weasel suit back at that time was Pat Patterson's, because Pat was in the AWA when Bobby was doing the weasel suit outfit with Greg Gagne, and thought that it may be a good way to get Ultimate Warrior over. So without Bobby having to do too much and have a match, go out and do a little match, short, sweet, to the point with Warrior, and do the weasel outfit. And they had a weasel suit made for him, and the rest, as I say, is history.
He's in his late 40s here with a broken neck, a really bad injury, and he's working against a very green Ultimate Warrior here at a time when he kind of wanted to get away from taking bumps. Is this something they have to sell him on, or is he jumping at the chance because it's a featured spot?
No, Bobby would go out, and Bobby is the one who called the spots where he took bumps. Bobby is the one that took those bumps. Nobody ever said, "Oh, Bobby, you got to go take these bumps. You got to go do the bump into the corner," or anything like that. That was all Bobby. That was Bobby doing above and beyond, and he felt that if he was going to be out there and entertain people, that he's got to give them what they paid to see.
SummerSlam 88, Bobby's pulling double duty, managing Rick Rude against Junkyard Dog. And then, of course, in the main event, he's ringside for Andre and DiBiase as they wrestle Hogan and Randy Savage. We've covered that a few times on both the DiBiase and Randy Savage episodes. Anything you want to mention to us about SummerSlam 88 and Bobby Heenan's involvement?
As far as SummerSlam 88, it was another way to get Bobby out there and to be able to get him in front of the crowd. And having Bobby is a part of that package with Andre and everybody just adds to the heat and adds to the excitement. Anytime that Bobby could be a part of something, it just is, it's putting the bow on the package.
October of 88, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson come into the World Wrestling Federation, and they adopt the name the Brain Busters, and they're here managed by Bobby the Brain Heenan. It seems like a natural fit, but I'm curious, how did they get along with Bobby? Why were they put with Bobby? Talk us through the Brain Buster Bobby Heenan pairing.
I think that Vince wanted to put them with Bobby to get them over instantly and give them instant credibility. The Brainbuster name was obviously something from being a part of the Brains family and being a part of Bobby's family and having Bobby manage them. So the Brainbusters was just kind of a natural extension of that. But I know Bobby definitely liked Arn, and they got along, but it was a good team. It was a good, solid tag team. And I think everybody pretty much, got along pretty good, but I think that it helped the Brainbusters, Tully and Arn, instantly have credibility in the WWF when they came in.
Well, speaking of credibility here, around this same time, Bobby is asked to lend some credibility to one of our favorites here on the show, the Red Rooster. Why was this done? Why is this a rib on Bobby to put him with the Red Rooster?
Well, by the time that Bobby got to the Red Rooster, it was kind of I don't want to say lost cause, but it was pretty much almost a lost cause. And they figured, well, we'll get Bobby with him. If the guy's going to get over at all, if he's going to even have a chance, then put him with Bobby Heenan. And by putting Bobby out there with Terry, again, it gave Terry instant heat. And then the idea to have them break up and to turn Terry babyface was, again, another opportunity. If you're going to turn with the hottest guy that you can, and that being Bobby Heenan. And the story, then became the Brooklyn Brawler and the whole George Steinbrenner, which that was just something that was caught. You know, people talk about celebrities and people being involved and all the scripting going on. The bit with George Steinbrenner in Tampa on TV where the Red Rooster was talking back to Bobby Heenan and not doing what Bobby said. When Bobby went over to Steinbrenner and said, "Hey, what would you do if you had a ball player that didn't listen to you?" And Steinbrenner, without hesitation, "I'd fire him." That was just impromptu stuff. That was the beauty of a guy like Bobby Heenan and a beauty of the time in the business where you didn't have to script everything, where things could happen spontaneous and you would get good stuff out of it.
Over the years, Bobby has said that he was not a fan of Terry Taylor and he felt like Terry lied to him in WCW. I think I have an idea of the story. Did you ever get the story from Bobby about all that?
About what happened in WCW? No, but he wasn't, you know, I don't know how many people in the WWF really at the time, or, you know, who knows? I don't know anybody that was a big fan of Terry. So I don't know what happened at WCW, what Terry lied to him about, but doesn't surprise me.
Let's get to Survivor Series 88, Richfield Coliseum. Here we are, and we see the Brainbusters teaming with Demolition, the Bolsheviks, the Conquistadors, and the Rougeau brothers. Of course, Bobby's there with the Brainbusters, and he's all over this card again. The very next match, he's out there with Andre, as Andre teams with Harley Race, Mr. Perfect, and Dino Bravo. They take on Jim Duggan, Jake Roberts, Ken Patera, Scott Casey, and Tito Santana. And then he's ringside for the very next match, the main event. This time we've got Haku and Red Rooster. That's who he's out there managing. They team with Akeem, Big Boss Man, and Ted DiBiase. They're taking on Hogan, Savage, Hercules, Coco Beware, and Hillbilly Jim. Surprise, surprise, Savage and Hogan are the winners and the sole survivors of the match. What can you tell us about Survivor Series 88 and Heenan's involvement on the card?
Well, again, you know, Bobby's the man. So Bobby will go down as Hulk Hogan, in my opinion, Hulk Hogan's greatest rival of all time. And, you know, Bobby was doing so many things, but at this time in Bobby's career, Bobby was looking more at what did he want to do long term. And as much as Bobby was involved, Bobby was still looking to do more commentary, more. If there was a guest appearance somewhere, that's what Bobby wanted to do. Bobby didn't want to have his career, you know, managing guys and going to the ring back and forth. He was looking to do more of the stuff with Monsoon, whether it be on Challenge, whether it be on Primetime, whatever it was. He was looking to get beyond that and be that standard bearer, I guess, if you will, or the ambassador for the WWF as far as commentary and so on and so forth.
January 7th, Saturday night's main event. The Red Rooster here loses a match to Tito Santana. Bobby the Brain slaps him and Rooster beats him up, and this ends their business relationship. On the Royal Rumble 1989, we see Bobby in a situation with Rick Rude where Rude is doing a super pose down with the Ultimate Warrior, and Bobby winds up spraying something in Warrior's eyes, and Rude attacks him with the metal workout bar. We've talked about this briefly before on the show, but how frustrating was it to see Bobby do the spray and Warrior not really react to it?
not react to it, almost eat the water basically, and no sell it at all. So yeah, and for an old pro like Bobby Heenan, I think deep down he wanted to just reach out and just slap the living shit out of him to get him to register something. But extremely frustrating because it's just a rookie move.
Next up, we're going to see a situation at Royal Rumble 89 where King Haku is taking on Bobby's former client, Harley Race, and Haku wins the match. So Bobby's ringside for this. Two guys that we've talked a lot about here on the show, Harley Race and Haku. Any fun or interesting stories you might have about Bobby pairing with either one of those guys?
You know, Harley and Bobby go way back. And like he tells the story about Harley calling him when he went to work for Vince in the first place. And then, hey, years later, there's Harley. And so it was poetic justice that Harley would eventually be managed by Bobby Heenan. And I think, Heenan just kind of constantly ribbing Harley, and it was the King moniker. And I think Harley wanted to be Harley Race. He didn't want to be the King. But Bobby could be relentless and just in little digs that he knew would get under Harley's skin from time to time. And of course, working with Haku being Haku and being absolutely one of the toughest men to ever walk the face of the earth, he didn't want to make a whole lot of waves there. He wanted to make sure that Haku was definitely on his side, not only, in front of the people, but also in the back. Haku was a good guy to have as your friend.
So around this time, we see Bobby appear on Primetime Wrestling, and Terry Taylor joins him, and all of a sudden, the Brooklyn Brawler debuts and jumps the Red Rooster. So now Bobby is going to be put with the Brawler. What did Bobby think about working with Lombardi? And he's one of those quirky guys. I feel like there's got to be a good Heenan Lombardi story.
Well, Bobby looked at, and when they're looking at the roster of guys that you could choose from, and the Brooklyn Brawler was the perennial extra who was always putting guys over. And Bobby looks at it and goes, what could be almost that lowest common denominator, that lowest level that I could go to prove that I can make anybody? And I want to say that it was Bobby's choice to say, hey, what if we used Lombardi and we give him a gimmick? And he's from Brooklyn, and we make him the Brawler, and so on and so forth. So the first time that Brawler comes out, he's in the outfit, and he's wearing the old New York, the Brooklyn Dodgers jersey and all this stuff, and he's got jeans on and everything. He goes, how do I look? And Bobby's like, you're not dirty enough. He says, what do you mean? And so he went and picked up some dirt, literally dirt, and wiped on it. He says, no, you're still not dirty enough. So Bobby has Brawler, and I want to say we were somewhere in Wisconsin, and has him crawl up into the bowels of the building on the air conditioning ducts and around all the machinery, and just get all over his belly, roll around in it, and smeared him with all this grease and grime and dirt. And Brawler comes out, and he's filthy dirty, and Bobby's like, now there's a Brawler. And just kind of stuff like that he would basically have Steve do ridiculous things, and whatever Bobby asked him to do, Steve would do.
That's fun stuff. I don't know how I missed it, but somehow towards the end of 88 here, before we're into 89, Bobby sold Hercules to the $1 Million Man, and that essentially turns Hercules face. So now we're at WrestleMania 5, and Bobby's going to be managing King Haku against his former client, Hercules. What went down with the decision to have Bobby constantly selling people? He sold Andre the Giant. He sold Hercules. This is an interesting storyline.
He didn't sell people. He sold contracts of people so that other people can then guide their careers going forward. Come on now. We're not slaves.
I'm just saying, as a kid, the gimmick is, he sold him.
Think of how ridiculous that is. Just, just for a minute, but hey.
Okay. Yeah, it is ridiculous. So, hey, the Undertaker's dead. Anyway.
Yeah.
He's out at WrestleMania 5 with the Brainbusters, and they're taking on Strikeforce. The Busters win the match, of course, after Rick Martel walks out on Tino Santana. And Bobby's out for the very next match. This time he's managing Andre the Giant against Jake Roberts. And a few matches later, Bobby's back out managing Rick Rude as he challenges the Ultimate Warrior for the Intercontinental title. And I think most people remember this. Rude wins the match and the title after Warrior goes for a suplex from the outside back in, and Bobby grabs Warrior's leg and holds him down. This allows Rude to fall on top and gain the pin. And then after the match, Warrior beats up Bobby pretty good, and it looks like he botches the press slam, and Bobby has a pretty rough landing. What can you tell us about WrestleMania 5 and specifically this Warrior Rude match?
Well, he did, and the thing is that Bobby's holding on for dear life. If you go back and watch that match, you can see Bobby holding on for dear life. And Warrior didn't know how to do the press slam. Okay, I know everybody says that was his finish. That's what he did every night. But Warrior used to grab people by the neck, and then he would grab them literally by the testicles and squeeze and try and power them up. Guys that know how to do the press slam know how to get the person that they're press slamming to help them. You also don't grab their testicles. You grab right inside their crotch on their leg, and they've got to get stiff as a board, and they've got to help you up. But Warrior didn't know how to do it. And since he was always working with enhancement talent, the enhancement talent never said anything because they're working with the top guy on TV. And they're too afraid to say, "Hey, man, the guy's squeezing the shit out of my balls every night. I don't think he knows how to do it." So everyone assumed that he was doing it right. Well, then finally, Warrior worked with Honky Tonk Man, and Warrior goes down for the press slam, grabs Honky by the balls, and gets him up. And Honky comes back and says, "Hey, you grab me by the balls again, I'm going to take one of your eyeballs out." And he says, "Well, what?" He says, "That's how I do it." He says, "Well, you ain't doing it like that with me." And people tried to show him. But he just, and it always amazed me because Warrior looked the way he looked. So you want to see the big strength move, but he didn't know how to do it. And he hurt a lot of people with that damn move. Because he would grab and squeeze their testes.
Speaking of testicles, Bobby then wrestled the Red Rooster, and Rooster won in 31 seconds. And Bobby wrote before the match, Vince came up to him and said, "All we need is 30 seconds. So Bobby goes to Terry and says, "I'll give you a turnbuckle charge. You move. I'll hit the post and bounce back, and you pin me." And then Rooster said something like, "But we've got 5 minutes of spots to do." And Bobby says, "After the match, when we get to the back, you can do them all."
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you remember?
That's the mentality between somebody that is just worried about themselves and getting their spots in. I got to get my stuff in, and being a pro. And this is what we need right now. Go out and get it done. Bobby knew what needed to get done.
July 18th, 1989, the Brainbusters, managed by Bobby Heenan, defeat Demolition in a 2 out of 3 falls match to win the World Tag Team titles. I mention this because before WrestleMania 5, Bobby had been in the WWF for like 4 years and had never managed a champion. He'd managed a lot of main event heels, but they'd never actually won gold. And then Rude wins the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania, and that July, the Brainbusters win the World Tag titles. Did Bobby ever give a shit about whether or not he was managing champions at all?
Hell no.
Yeah. I do think it's kind of fun because I think most of us assume that Bobby Heenan was managing nothing but top guys. And certainly he did manage his share of top guys, but it takes years before any of those guys are actually champion. Around the same time.
That's because with Bobby Heenan as their manager, they didn't need a belt.
I knew you were going to say that. They don't need it.
Well, it's true.
Summer of 89. We touched on this briefly in our primetime show. Bobby starts doing the Bobby Heenan show. It only lasts about 4 episodes, and it's the last 30 minutes of primetime wrestling. But here's where we meet some pretty interesting characters. We meet the Rosati sisters as the Oinkettes. We meet Jameson, who would later go on to manage the Bushwhackers. And I think we talked about her before. Porn star Heather Hunter is there. Some really great... I know it's ridiculous, but some really great moments from that show. What can you tell us about the Bobby Heenan show that we didn't already cover?
Oh my God. The Bobby Heenan show was a passion project for me. I loved it. It was something Vince and I came up with to further Bobby's career. And we told the story on primetime about, we did the Bobby Heenan show. And the idea was it'd be the last 30 minutes of primetime. We would change prime time to a 90-minute show. Then the last 30 would be the Bobby Heenan show. And it was an opportunity to showcase Bobby's wit and be able to get him in a different environment and rip on people, not just in the wrestling business. So we were looking outside. We were looking at the Freaks and Geeks show, Jim Rose Circus, that kind of stuff, to be able to bring and expose on this show and have Bobby have a lot of fun with them. The problem is we detailed in primetime was that our liaison with USA neglected to let USA Network know what the hell we were doing. So after 4 weeks of doing it, they called and said, "Hey, what the hell is going on here? What is this Bobby Heenan show? Why isn't Bobby on primetime like he has been for years? It's great that we have Piper, but we want Bobby and Gorilla." So it got yanked, and Bobby was upset at that. I mean, that one hurt. And it was during a time that we were trying to get in the Bobby Heenan business and trying to get him more stuff. I go back and I remember the time David Letterman had his, 25th anniversary or whatever the hell it was. It wasn't 25, but it was some kind of big anniversary. And David Letterman is from Indiana. So Letterman grew up watching Bobby the Brain Heenan. And he was always a big fan of Dick the Bruiser and Bobby the Brain Heenan. And Bobby was his biggest star to Letterman. Letterman loved Heenan. So when Letterman has this big show, he wants Bobby Heenan to be a part of the show. So we're like, hell yeah, we send Bobby. And Bobby says, "What do I do when I get there?" I said, "Well, they'll tell you. And Vince tells Bobby, famous last words. Bobby says, "What do I do?" Vince says, "Just take over." Well, what it was Letterman, who is notoriously shy and doesn't interact with his guests or anything like that. And at the parties afterwards, he doesn't talk to anybody or anything like that. The deal was that Letterman had invited all these people to this show, stars and everything, and all they were to do was be in the audience and be introduced. Well, they did 2 tapings. The first taping, Letterman comes out on stage and says, "We got a lot of guests here," and he introduces people and they take shots of it. Well, he says, "Bobby the Brain Heenan." And as Letterman's going on to the next guy, Bobby gets out of his seat and storms up on stage and had a action figure for him. And says, "Hey, on your anniversary here," he goes, "I'm here. I wanted to give you, the best gift anybody could give you. And I've got this official Bobby the Brain Heenan action figure. And this is the greatest thing." And Bobby kind of takes over. Letterman doesn't know what to do. And he thanks him and kind of gets him off the stage and everything. And they go on and they go to a break. And somebody comes up to him and says, "Who told you to do that?" He says, "Do what?" "Go up on stage." He says, "Well, he announced me." He says, "Yes, but that's just you wave when you're announced." And he says, "Okay." He says, "Well, who told you to do that?" He goes, "Nobody." So they do the second taping. And on each side of Bobby, they've got 2 huge goons standing next to him to make sure that he doesn't get up and go up there. And obviously they edited the whole thing out of the Letterman special.
Wow. I wish we could find some footage of that. Maybe somebody listening has a hookup. That'd be nice.
Oh my God. I would absolutely kill to see that, because I remember him calling me and going, he says, "Well, here's another one for the cashew." I said, "What happened now? How was it?" He says, "Well, I did exactly what he told me to do." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "I went up on stage and I did this." He goes, "And then the second show," he says, "they had 2 big goons next to me." He goes, "I didn't move." So it was, but Bobby wasn't afraid, man. He'd jump out there and do whatever. And I think that the greatest line Bobby ever came up with was in describing the business and describing the WWF. He would say, he goes, "You know what? We're just a traveling nut house, and Vince is the head cashew."
Good stuff, man. SummerSlam 89. Meadowlands. Bobby's managing the new tag team champions, the Brain Busters. They're in a non-title match against the Hart Foundation. Busters get the win and don't drop the belts. Obviously, it's non-title, but usually when they say non-title, that means it's going the other way. It didn't here. But it didn't go Bobby's way in the Rick Rude Ultimate Warrior rematch. Warrior wins the match and regains the Intercontinental title. And he's back out for the very next match when we've got Andre the Giant teaming with Akeem and the Big Boss Man against Demolition and Jim Duggan. Any memories about SummerSlam 89 that you could mention for us and Bobby's involvement?
God, during this time, it was so much. We were working, and yeah, Bobby was involved in everything. But you got to understand what we were working on the other side of things was to try and wean everything from Bobby. And it sounds crazy. The reason I'm laughing is you go through all this stuff and Bobby was in this, Bobby was in that. I don't remember those specifics because we were trying to wean them and trying to get Bobby into other things. And Bobby wanted so badly to be able to do that talk show, to be able to do that liaison stuff. And it was frustrating because that old saying, the more you go away, the more they pull you back in. And we relied on him for so much stuff. And like I said, you put somebody with Bobby Heenan, they're over. So we were constantly trying, at least from my vantage point, to find other avenues to display the talent that was Bobby Heenan, to be able to see that wit and hear that wit and allow him to do that in other areas.
Let's talk about Demolition. They actually beat the Brainbusters on October 2nd, 1989. And then come Survivor Series 89, Bobby's wrestling in the main event tag team elimination match. He's filling in for the recently fired Tully Blanchard and teaming with Arn Anderson with Haku and Andre to take on the Ultimate Warrior, the Rockers, and Jim Neidhart. And in the match, Bobby actually gets a pinfall victory over Marty Jannetty, and it comes down to Bobby and the Warrior as the last two in the match, and of course, Warrior pins him to win it. We've never talked about it before here. I know you're in a wind tunnel now, but what were your memories of Tully's firing, and why was Bobby the right audible to call?
Well, Bobby's right audible because he was the manager, and it was an easy fix because he's part of that threesome. But Tully had flunked his drug test, and Tully was gone, so there really wasn't much choice, and Bobby was a perfect fit. Just slide him in there. But yeah, it was just Tully screwing up and flunking the test.
Ultimately, this leads to December 13th, where we see Andre the Giant and Haku, managed by Bobby, defeat Demolition to win the World Tag Team titles. And now the Giant has some gold, which is obviously a big deal. And not too long after this, at a time when you're telling us they're trying to transition him out of managing, they ask him to manage the Barbarian. Kind of an interesting pairing. Why were the Barbarian and Bobby put together here?
Well, they took the Powers of Pain, Warlord and Barbarian, and they split them up into singles. So you've got the Warlord going with Mr. Fuji and thinking, all right, what do you do now with the Barbarian? And Vince's grand idea, or Pat's grand idea, was, well, he's probably got the biggest upside of the two. Let's put him with Heenan. And yeah, it was, like I said, the more we tried to pull him away, the more that he got pulled back into, well, he gets all these other guys over. He can definitely help the Barbarian. And the Barbarian probably needed it more than anybody because he wasn't a good promo. He couldn't do promos, and he needed a manager. And they thought that with Bobby behind him, that he could possibly be somebody that could work a program with Ultimate Warrior or Hogan or any of the other top baby faces.
Wrestlemania 6 is the next major show, and we've covered this long form in the archives. Check it out if you'd like more details. But here we see Bobby manage the World Tag Team Champions, the Colossal Connection with Andre and Haku. They're defending against Demolition, and of course Demolition gets the win and regains the title. But what's most interesting is after the match, Bobby is yelling at Andre, and he slaps him, and you could actually hear him say something like, "I'm the fucking boss." And then Andre starts to paintbrush him. And Bobby wrote in his book, "I saw that big paw coming down, and I moved to the left. I thought he was going right to left, but he missed me. His hand moved back to the left, and I was moving my face to the right, and he connected. He was paintbrushing the hell out of me, but I couldn't tell him to stop. It was like driving a golf ball in a bathroom. I don't know where he was coming from. We talked about this briefly on the WrestleMania 6 show, but when you see how badly he's missing here, are you on a headset in the back? Or is everybody freaking out? What's the reaction? Does Andre get a pass because he's Andre?
Yes, pretty much. You know, I mean, he's Andre the Giant, so Vince isn't going to, come back and chew him out for missing. It's unfortunate, and you just got to chalk it up and say next.
Later in the show, Bobby managed the Barbarian who defeated Tito Santana, and Bobby wrote that after the event, a woman and her husband came backstage and asked Bobby if she could have the vest that Barbarian wore to the ring. Bobby asked him, and Barbarian said no. The woman was Mary Tyler Moore. Bobby ever tell you that story?
Yeah, that was pretty cool, actually, in Toronto to meet Mary Tyler Moore. But yes, yeah. You do better Barbarian than I do, but he had absolutely no idea who Mary Tyler Moore was.
Later in the same show, Bobby's out managing Rick Rude, who defeats Jimmy Snuka. And let's fast forward around June of 1990, not long after Mr. Perfect wins the Intercontinental title in a tournament, he enlists Bobby Heenan to be his new manager, and Mr. Perfect calls him the Perfect Manager. We did a full show on Mr. Perfect, also in the archives. Pretty good pairing here, and one of the guys I associate with Bobby the most. What did Bobby think of working with Kurt, and what did you think of the pairing?
Well, Bobby had known Kurt since he was a kid, so they were the perfect pair, and Bobby was the perfect manager. They enjoyed working with each other, and it was just second nature. They didn't have to talk. They knew each other so well, from Bobby knowing Kurt as a kid and Kurt knowing Bobby and watching him growing up, that they didn't have to talk. They didn't have to go over things, from the towel throw in the ring. Every little thing that they did was just perfect, pun intended.
I think somewhere along the lines here, I read that Bobby felt like the best three workers he ever had an opportunity to perform with were Nick Bockwinkel, or maybe it was Ray Stevens, but the other two were Kurt and Ric Flair. Do you know that he held Kurt in such high regard?
Yeah, because Kurt was just that damn good. And I want to say there was, I don't know if Rick was in there, because he didn't really get to work with Rick that much, but I always thought it was Bockwinkel, Stevens, and Kurt.
All right, let's take a look here at what we've got coming for SummerSlam 90, which I hope we get to cover at some point in long form. Bobby would manage Mr. Perfect, who defends his belt against the Texas Tornado. But ultimately, Tornado wins the match and the title. So once again, Bobby's on the losing end of the Intercontinental belt. We haven't really spent much time talking about Kerry Von Erich. There's probably not enough out there for us to do a lot on him. What was the wrap on him here, though, in August of 90 when you guys put the Intercontinental belt on him?
Kerry had a great story, and we really wanted to tell that story of Kerry losing his foot and being able to function and go out and have matches and wrestle with only one foot. So it was a true miracle that he was able to do that. It wasn't like he was catching a ball with one eye or anything, but we always wanted to tell that story, and that was the idea about bringing Kerry Von Erich in the first place. But I think that people thought it was awful courageous, and still, even with the peg leg, Kerry was a hell of a worker, and everybody still enjoyed working with him.
Bobby's also managing in the main event. He's managing Rick Rude here in a cage match for the world title against the Ultimate Warrior. Warrior, of course, wins the match and retains the title. We talked about that in long form in the Rick Rude episode. Any memories that you want to drop on us about Bobby at SummerSlam 90? It's one of the favorite shows of mine as a kid.
Well, it's just the whole build-up, getting to that match and being able to bring Rude back and have the whole program with Warrior to be able to get Warrior over and get Warrior in the position as a champion. And Bobby was instrumental in those Rick Rude vignettes that we did right here in Tampa, as a matter of fact, with the mitts and everything, and Bobby helping us set that up. But a lot of that came out of the brain of Bobby Heenan and being able to get a heel over and get a champion over. That was a lot of that orchestrated by Bobby in making Rude the guy and also making Warrior the guy.
In October and November, Big Boss Man found himself working a series of matches with Bobby the Brain Heenan. What did Bobby think about working with Boss Man?
Absolutely loved it because Ray was just an old country boy and he had a lot of respect for him. But I think probably the best part of it was, Bobby was quick-witted and Bobby was able to have all of those comebacks and started on the mother stuff. And some guys might take exception to that. Some guys like, hey, don't talk about my mama. And some guys don't want to talk about their personal lives, if you will. But Boss Man was totally cool with it. Boss Man's mom was totally cool with it. And I remember the first time that Bobby actually met Boss Man's mama was just absolutely priceless because she came in with a full head of steam and he had no idea what the hell to think. But it was nice to have the shoe on the other foot with somebody messing with Bobby a little bit there.
Survivor Series 1990 goes down on November 22nd in Hartford. Of course, Bobby's all over the show again. He's managing Mr. Perfect, who's teaming with Axe, Smash, and Crush. They're going to take on Warrior, LOD, and Texas Tornado. Of course, Warrior's the winner and the sole survivor. He also manages Haku and Barbarian. They're teaming with Earthquake and Dino Bravo to take on Hogan, Duggan, Bossman, and Tugboat. Of course, Hogan is the winner there and the sole survivor. Coming out of that, though, he's working a whole string of matches again with Big Boss Man. I mean, all the way through the end of the year. And they keep it going on into January. In Chattanooga, they do kind of a fun gimmick match, a ball and chain match. Catch us up, Bruce. What in the world is a ball and chain match?
Well, back in the old days when prisoners would be in the prison yard, they used to have a ball and chain wrapped around their damn ankle. So Boss Man, we had, when he turned babyface, what is something the Boss Man could do that would get a reaction? He started carrying this damn ball and chain around, and at the end of the matches, he would drop it on them. And it was a big-ass bowling ball attached to a chain. So the idea was that was the ball and chain to the Big Boss Man. And I think I was one of the first. I'm the one that set it up for Bobby anyway, to take that damn thing, his brother Love, when I went out and Boss Man got me in the ring and I took the damn ball and chain. But it was easy. It was good.
Royal Rumble 91 goes down, and Bobby's here managing the Barbarian, taking on the Big Boss Man. Of course, Boss Man wins the match as Bruce breathes right into his microphone. And then WrestleMania 7 is right around the corner. We did a whole show about that, long form, if you'd like to check it out. But Bobby is the MVP of the show, and I think a lot of people have kind of slept on this. He's doing double duty. He's not only managing, but he's doing commentary with Gorilla as well. He manages Haku and Barbarian, and they lost to the Rockers. Later in the show, Bobby's managing Mr. Perfect, who's defending his IC title against the Big Boss Man. And this is the first WrestleMania in a while that wasn't called by Gorilla and Jesse Ventura. Why was Bobby picked to do it? How do you think he did? Obviously, we all love he and Gorilla Monsoon on the mic.
Well, Jesse was gone by this point. And, with the absence of Jesse and Jesse leaving, that left a really big void for that heel commentary position, that color commentary position. And that's where I think Bobby excelled. And it was just the logical next step to put Bobby into that spot.
During the summer, we see pretty much the managerial end of Bobby Heenan. Of course, he would be a consultant for Ric Flair. But during that summer is when he sells Mr. Perfect's contract to the coach, and he would start doing commentary.
So he sold another human being.
He would start doing commentary full time on TVs and pay-per-views. And Bobby has been pretty open at this point that he wanted to quit managing because of his neck. When do you remember having an official sit down of, hey, we're done? We said we were going to try to wind it down, but this is it.
God, we had so many of them. And it just finally actually came to fruition. We tried, kept trying, and then Vince would continually put something else on him. And I think that the absence of Jesse really was what made Vince go, okay, maybe if we concentrate on Bobby over here. And it made Bobby happy. And we had a happy camper there that was glad that he was off the road. He just didn't want to be on the road anymore. It was eating him up. every single day. He wanted to be home. His daughter was getting older, and he was tired. He was tired. He was sore, and he wanted to be doing commentary. He wanted to be doing other stuff, and he wasn't having fun on the road. He didn't enjoy the boys anymore. He didn't enjoy the travel, and just wanted to stop.
So check this out. August 2nd, Long Island, Bobby defeats Mr. Fuji in what turns out to be Bobby's last ever wrestling match. I think that's right. I don't think I would have ever guessed that in a trivia contest. Did you ever have a conversation with Bobby about his last match and it being against Mr. Fuji?
No, and I don't even know if Bobby would even remember that, but no, never did. And I think that Bobby kind of saw his last matches is pretty much, in his eyes, his matches and his last stuff was probably with the Warrior. And I know you're going to say, oh, well, he wrestled this match, he wrestled that match, he wrestled that match. But to him, if it wasn't a program and it didn't mean something, then it didn't register. So to him, the last big run was probably with Warrior.
Around SummerSlam 91 is when Vince approaches Bobby and tells him that Ric Flair's coming in and he's eventually going to be the world champion, and Vince wants Bobby to manage him. Of course, we all remember Bobby did commentary at SummerSlam 91 with Gorilla and Roddy Piper, and at one point approaches Hulk Hogan's locker room in the back with the big gold belt. Hogan slams the door in his face. He drops the belt, but it's a real big tease that Ric Flair's coming in. Bobby wrote in his book, from the first time he told me about it, I didn't want to do it. I was still hurting. I lost my heart for it. I used to like to take bumps at the end of matches and be brought in and thrown into the turnbuckles. I don't love to work, and it wasn't fun anymore. And my deal wasn't that I was going to manage anymore, but I knew that if I didn't do it, they would dump me over it. Flair told me Hogan wanted to go work and on the road for 6 months with me. Bobby started to appear on the WWF TV, of course, with the world title around this time pretty consistently, not just SummerSlam, but all the syndicated shows, and saying that the real world's champion is going to be coming to the WWF. Of course, we know the attorneys get involved and they have to stop doing that. And Bobby wrote something like, I agreed to manage him, but I only lasted 10 days. I just couldn't work anymore. It hurt so bad I couldn't sleep at night. I never took pills or medication. I had beer, scotch, and wine to help. And he wrote that Rick told him, you don't have to do anything. Just stand there, Bobby. And he said he couldn't take it. He reached a point where he had to move, and that when his man is hit, he's got to sell it. So I know you weren't there at the time, and it only lasted a brief amount of time, but is that the same version of the story that you heard, the way things were going down with him not being comfortable with any of the moves anymore?
He like I said, I mean, he hated it. He hated being, but it wasn't just that. It was the whole culmination. He didn't want to be on the road. He found himself out, drinking every night, and that wasn't fun to him anymore. It was just no fun. And for him to just stand there and do nothing is not who Bobby Heenan is, and that's not what people paid to see. So while, yeah, sure, he definitely could have gone out there and just stood in the corner and done nothing, but then you're not getting Bobby Heenan and you're not getting your money's worth. So it was the combination. It was the whole combination, and probably more than anything was being on the road with Flair. He hated it.
He mentions that his first encounter with Ric Flair was when Rick was a fan. Of course, Rick lived in Minneapolis and grew up in Minneapolis, or Minnesota rather. And so right outside of an auditorium up there after an AWA show, Rick makes the approach and they get into some sort of skirmish, and Bobby punches him in the mouth. This is at least according to Rick. Of course, Bobby doesn't remember it, but it's kind of fun that that's how they first meet. And then later he's managing the world champion. Of course, Bobby's doing commentary, not nearly as well as Bruce is breathing into his microphone, but he's there for SummerSlam. He's there for
the microphone.
Okay, well, here's what we hear. Bobby's doing commentary at Survivor Series 91, Tuesday in Texas, Royal Rumble 92, WrestleMania 8, SummerSlam 92, Survivor Series 92, Rumble 93, all the big shows, usually with Gorilla, a couple in there with Vince, and he's doing commentary on Raw with Vince. But maybe most famously, what we remember as fans, or at least I do, is WrestleMania 9 with the debuting Jim Ross and, of course, Randy Savage. And Bobby's riding to the ring backwards on a camel. You were there for this. What did Bobby think of the set and riding a camel to the ring?
I think that the only thing that would have been better than a camel, I think Bobby wanted to ride a giraffe. But it was Bobby's idea. It was Bobby's idea to ride the camel backwards and to go out like he did. So that was just, another example of classic Bobby Heenan being able to take something when we had all of these animals. It's like, hey, can I ride an elephant? No, Cleopatra's riding the elephant. Well, you have a giraffe? We have a camel. So if you don't have it, you can't ride the elephant. We don't have a giraffe, so camel's next. And he wrote it down the first time the right way, and then he said, let me try it backwards, and did it backwards, and there you go.
We can't let you get away here when we say giraffe on the show, because I don't know when we'll talk about this again, but we had the second night of our New York show this past August before SummerSlam. Brian joined us on stage and told a hilarious story about why Vince McMahon hates giraffes. Can you share that with everybody?
Well, it started off with cats have no integrity and giraffes are pussies. That's all I really remember. That's a part of the story I always remember, because Brian always wanted to, if he wrote a book, that was going to be the name of the book. Cats have no integrity and giraffes are pussies. The world according to Vince McMahon.
So we mentioned that on stage, and Brian tags on and says, do you remember why? And Bruce said no. And Brian said, and he did his best Vince McMahon impression, and he says, an animal that big and he only eats plants? I don't buy it. I don't know why, but that cracked me up. Any memories? We're talking a lot about Bobby Heenan as a commentator. One of my favorite lines from all of his commentary is when he was calling a WCW luchador match. And, of course, they're smaller performers. And as they're running around the ring, Bobby says something like, it looks like a riot in a daycare. And I don't know why, but it cracked me up. And of course, I think most of us still think his WrestleMania or his Royal Rumble 92 performance was masterful. I mean, it was a perfect soundtrack to that match and the performance that Rick put on. Is there a one line or one event or one segment that Bobby did on commentary that really stands out to you all these years later?
There just were so many, and from the ham and egger stuff, but for me, all of that made Bobby Heenan, and, Miss Betty and the oink-ettes and just the things that would come out of his mouth that some people might think, but they would never say. Bobby never had a problem expressing himself. And I go back and, when I found out I passed, and I wrote about how Bobby was a father, he was a mentor, he was a friend, he was all these things to me. And I always remember the night we were eating dinner in Sanford, Connecticut, and the waitress looks at the two of us, and we were going back and forth, and she looks at Bobby and she points at me and she says, is this your son? And he starts to laugh and he says, yeah. And he started calling me son from that point forward. So he calls his wife Cindy that night and tells her, he says, honey, I got some news. She says, what's that? She says, well, we have a son. Now you got to put yourself in Cindy's shoes for a minute. She's been with Bobby for a long, long time, and you never know what the hell's going to come out of his mouth. And she's like, oh God, did you get some woman pregnant? Now you've got a son. And he's like, no, it's Bruce. He's our son. And from that point forward, I was son, and he was dad, and she was mom, and Jess was sis. But those are the, to me, those stand out, those memories with Bobby and sitting there, just one-on-one and being at his home and spending 3 weeks, when I had nowhere to go. And he's like, well, come and hang out here. And we would drive and go through the beverage barn. And he had a Chrysler LeBaron, I believe. It was a convertible. And we'd go through the beverage barn, and he had a 6-pack run and a 12-pack run. And we'd stay in the neighborhood, and he would just drive nice and slow around the neighborhood, around the golf course, and we'd either drink a 6-pack or a 12-pack. And that was our runs. But that was my Bobby Heenan time. That was my, I just, I love the man, and I love the character. The character was great. Everything that he, everything that he did, and try to come up with on demand, what's the best line? I can't even think of one right now, but I think of those special times that we had sitting watching Judge Judy every friggin' day on his couch, and for 4 days, we wore the exact same swimsuit and sat in the same place, it seemed like, for 4 days and did nothing. He just was just such a special guy, and I'm gonna miss the hell out of him. The last time that I really got to spend, I saw him at Wrestlemania, and I got to say hi. But about a year before that, I saw him in Houston at an appearance, and I had my daughter with me, and he got to meet my daughter, and to see his eyes. Bobby had a hard time expressing himself because of his cancer, his throat cancer, and it was hard. He was hard to understand, but it took me about 3 or 4 minutes to get in a rhythm with him, and we talked for the longest time, and I don't think that anybody else really could have understood what he was saying. I understood every word. And to see his eyes and to see him light up when he met my daughter was probably one of the coolest things. It was the best. And that's what I remember, man. That was the here's a crazy one for you. Bobby was booked to be in Detroit next week, and I had called Cindy several weeks ago just to say, hey, because I'd heard that he wasn't going to be there. I was like, I wanted to go see him, and it sucks. It just really sucks. But the joy that he brought me, going here's a Bobby Heenan story. We go to look at townhouses. I was going to get a townhouse in Connecticut, and Bobby comes with me. And there's this big empty townhouse, and the guy's taking me through and showing. Bobby says, "Do you have a bathroom?" The guy tells him where the bathroom is. Bobby walks into the bathroom, shuts the door, and he's in there for a little while. I'm walking around, and then I hear, the toilet flush, and then and then you hear uh-oh. And the next thing, the door opens, and Bobby says, "Do you have a plunger?" It was just stuff like that made Bobby Heenan Bobby Heenan. It was walking in to my bedroom one time and meeting a young lady that I was dating at the time, and walking into my bedroom and jumping on the bed and says, "So this is the old workbench, huh?" Those are the lines I remember. That's the Bobby that I loved, and that I'll forever just, those are the memories that I'll keep.
Oh man, I don't know where to go from here.
I say we go home, because Bobby was so special, and when he left the WWE,
let's briefly touch on that. His contract's up in '93. Vince offers him a new contract Then a week later, he tells Bobby he can't honor the contract and needs him to take a 50% pay cut. Bobby didn't want to do that. He was tired. He just thought it was time to go. So December 3rd, 1993, on Raw from White Plains, it's Bobby's last Raw. And at a production meeting, Vince asks him how he wants to go. And Bobby says to have Gorilla Monsoon throw him out after going through his bags and finding stolen stuff. Towels, light bulbs, ashtrays, phone books, whatever. Everything from the hotel. And that's what the Brain would do. And according to the legend, Pat Patterson says something like, "Why don't you have bra and panties in there too?" And Bobby, always quick, says, "Well, Pat, I think we travel and pack differently." During the show, Gorilla comes out while Bobby's doing commentary, grabs Bobby, walks him backstage with the bag, and then throws him out of the arena. And that's the end of Bobby Heenan in the WWE. And that night, they go back to the LaGuardia Holiday Inn, and they say their goodbyes when they take their elevator to the floor. They're on the same floor. Bobby said to Gorilla, "Well, 9 years together. Good luck, partner." And they shook hands and went to their respective rooms. When Bobby gets to his room, there's a big basket of bananas in there. So he calls Gorilla and says, "Hey, I have some bananas in here. Do you want them?" So Gorilla comes down, and they say they hugged and cried for about an hour. And that was the end of Bobby Heenan in the WWE. What were you going to tag on to that, Bruce?
No, it just was, Bobby was ready to go. Right. Bobby was burnt. Bobby wanted to break. And he was ready to go. He knew if he stayed that there would just be more stuff dumped on him, and he had to get away. And I respected him for getting away. And we still remain close, and we still, talked and everything. I went and got him for Gino's funeral, picked him up at the airport, and we sat at the, we had a few the night before, and it was the man that you saw on TV was so different in many ways than the man himself. But at the same time, the man that you saw on TV, they were one and the same. From taking an elderly couple and backing them up into a swimming pool in Caesar's Palace to take their picture, and cutting the heads off of people when he would take their picture. Because back in the old days, kids, we had cameras with film that you had to wait to get developed before you see if it was a good picture or not. He was one of a kind. That's the only way to describe him. And I remember Jack Lanza inducting him into the Hall of Fame, and Jack did one of the all-time worst induction speeches that you'd ever want to hear. But I remember sitting in the audience and laughing, going, "How do you induct Bobby Heenan? He's gonna destroy you the minute he opens his mouth on stage." And Jack was doing it from a place of love, and he was babbling, kind of like I am right now, because it's hard to find words to describe how special that Bobby was, and how much he impacted the business that we all love. And without a doubt, every manager that has ever come in, they point to Bobby Heenan and they go, "I want to be like him," and you'll never be like him, because there was only one, and he was simply the best. If Bret Hart didn't have it, Bobby was the best there was, the best there is, the best there ever will be. I'd put that moniker on him. So it was hard to say goodbye when he left, but I understood, and we all supported it, man. We all were like, I get it.
He goes to WCW in 94. He leaves in 2000. There's lots of rumor and innuendo about the way he leaves. But during Bobby's time in WCW, he would say that he was pressured a lot of times to say things negative or bad about the WWF or Vince McMahon, and he never would. And it got to a point to where Bischoff even questioned if he still worked for the WWE because Bobby wouldn't say anything bad about him. And Bobby has written that he was a little hurt that everybody was welcomed back after saying numerous bad things about the company, whether it was Warrior or Brett or Hogan or whoever, and they were all welcome back, but Bobby never really was. But he did return as a surprise in 2001 at Wrestlemania 17. He did commentary with Mean Gene for the gimmick battle royal that you were a part of that people ask a lot of questions about. When Bobby was there, WrestleMania 17 in 2001 in Houston, was he tickled to be back? What was that reunion like for him to finally be back home?
He was, and it was great to have him back. And it was, a nice little spotlight to have he and Gene just redo a lot of the shtick that they did for so many years, going back to the AWA and WWF. But Bobby was welcomed back with open arms. And I know that Bobby always had a special place in Vince's heart.
Why do you think Bobby was never given an opportunity to come back full time in 2000 or 2001 before he was diagnosed in 2002?
He was, and he was considered to come in and do special projects and different things. And then, shortly thereafter, just on timing and things, he unfortunately had the cancer, and it just kind of made it prohibitive. But he was discussed, and there were things that were talked about, and it just never, ever panned out.
Well, as you're listening to this on Friday the 29th, Bobby is being laid to rest, and it's been an emotional time to talk about all of this, I'm sure, for Bruce. I want to run through some accolades, some accomplishments. We'll get to some Twitter questions, and then we'll get out of here. If you'd like to participate and ask some questions for Bad Blood next week, I encourage you to follow us on Twitter. It's @PrichardShow. You can also like us on Facebook. We've got a very special tribute video for Bobby the Brain Heenan that you don't want to miss. It's on Facebook only, facebook.com/something to wrestle. Throw us a like. We're trying to go ahead and give you some bonus shows as well. Bobby the Brain Heenan won Pro Wrestling Illustrated's Manager of the Year Award in 1972, 1976, 1989, and 1991. He went into Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame in 1996. He earned the Iron Mike Award from the Cauliflower Alley Club in 2004. He won the Wrestling Observer Best Commentator Award in 1992, 1993, and 1994. He went in the WWE's Hall of Fame in 2004. He went in the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum in 2006. He received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Pro Wrestling Report in 2009. He went in the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2010. And he won the Stanley Weston Award in 2012. Lots of people were touched by Bobby Heenan and had some nice things to say. On Twitter, Dave Meltzer wrote, "Bobby Heenan just passed away a few hours ago. He was the best ever at what he did." Ric Flair tweeted, "Bobby Heenan, the greatest manager, one of the greatest announcers, and one of the best in-ring performers in the history of the business." Hulk Hogan wrote, "Worked with Bobby Heenan from 1980 until my career ended. Learned new things from him every single day. Love you, my brother. R.I.P." Vince McMahon himself tweeted, "One of the greatest managers and announcers in WWE history. Our thoughts are with the Heenan family." Quite the legacy that Bobby is going to leave in professional wrestling. But maybe I've saved one of the best stories for last. You talked to us about this once before on Why Was Bruce Fired? And we covered your first, hiatus from the company in 91. And you told us that there was an idea kicked around for you to come back as Bobby Heenan Jr. Tell us more about Bobby Heenan Jr. Were you going to have jackets? Were you going to dye your hair? Were you going to try to pattern your jewelry and your look and the cadence and your phrases after Brain? Or how far down the road did Bobby Heenan Jr. get?
All the above. I had the Clairol hair dye, number 1, platinum blonde. The rings, he had a ring from Pepper Gomez. It was a wrestling ring that he wore as a pinky ring that he traded Pepper Gomez the ring for a Pinto. And I had the counterpart to that ring, Paul Bosch's ring, that I've since lost when I moved the last time. But I was going to wear the sequin jackets. I was basically going to be a clone of Bobby Heenan. The idea behind it was this was during the time that Bobby was managing Flair, and Bobby just didn't want to do it. And he pitched Vince, I pitched Vince, and Vince was on board, and we were going to do vignettes in Tampa at his house, whole 9 yards. And then it changed, and Mr. Perfect came in, and I remember being on the phone with Vince. I said, well, he says, I just don't have anything for you. So, well, what about the Bobby Heenan Jr. deal? He says, that's just not a good idea, pal. 36 hours before that, it was, one of the greatest ideas in the world. And then whatever happened, but it just kind of fell by the wayside. And, in real life, I got to be his son, and I've always felt a part of his family, and that's good enough for me.
You talked earlier about when you spent 3 weeks with Bobby. Am I to take it that happened when you were on your hiatus in 91, 92? That'd
be correct. I used to take vacation and just go and hang out with him. Cindy would get tired of us quick, but yeah, the 3-week one was on my hiatus, and just spent some time down there and chilled, got away from the world.
Well, let's cruise over to Twitter and let's wrap this week's episode up. We invited you to ask questions. I tweeted out right from the @Prichard Show account. I have a question for @Bruce Prichard about Bobby Heenan. Just reply to this tweet with your question. Let's do some rapid fire here. Bruce, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Michael wants to know, who does Bruce believe that Bobby worked with the best when he was managing?
Who did he manage the best, or who did he work with? And I think that as far as a manager, it would have to be Mr. Perfect. I thought that they were the perfect team. And Nick Bockwinkel.
Great idea here from Alter Ego. He says, just like the gorilla position, shouldn't the commentary table be renamed the Heenan position?
If you want to be a great color guy, yes.
David Myers wants to know, what's the best Heenan line that we never heard because it was backstage and couldn't make air?
To me, the best line was his "uh-oh" in my condo.
Nick tweeted at Survivor Series 93 when Bobby said, you have 9 months to name a kid and you come up with Bruce. Was that a rib on Prichard?
100%.
Tim wants to know, I know Bobby and Gorilla were the best of friends, but were they friends at first sight, or did it take time for them to warm up to each other?
I don't really know. By the time I got there, they were thick as thieves, and they were great friends. So I assume they kind of hit it off right away. I hit it off with the two of them, so I could see where that could happen.
We never talked about it, but how was Gorilla once Bobby left? Did he take it hard? Was he cool? What was that relationship like once Bobby was gone from the World Wrestling Federation?
He was cool, but there was a big part of Gorilla that was lost when Bobby left. There was nobody that had that chemistry like Bobby and Gino did.
I don't know that we've ever really discussed this before. You mentioned earlier that Bobby used to smoke in Vince's office before he got there. Do you believe that smoking played a part in Heenan's cancer and surgeries?
Maybe it did, but Bobby wasn't a chain smoker. He didn't smoke a lot. So, I mean, it may have, probably did.
Derek wants to know, was there ever any consideration given to turning Bobby face? Jimmy Hart did this somewhat unexpectedly with Hogan, so it seems like it could have been realistic.
Yeah, without a doubt, all the time when we were looking to do the single shows with him and get him out of managing, we thought that naturally people were going to love him, and that we didn't have to turn him face. We just had to turn him loose and let him be Bobby on air, that he was off air, and that people would love him.
Yo Mamba wants to know, what was the greatest rib you ever saw Bobby pull on someone?
Oh God. It was just probably the constant stuff that nobody ever knew, like, using the bathroom in Vince's office and things like that. It was little stuff that was hilarious that you could chuckle about afterwards and just kind of have a secret.
El Maximo says, Bobby always seemed unshakable and never at a loss for words. Was there ever an instance in his career where he was left completely speechless?
Yeah, Bobby was very shakeable. Bobby could be paranoid, and Bobby was insecure at times, very much so, that he would second guess pretty much everything. But as soon as you turned the red light on, he was on. You couldn't rattle him.
Rob wants to know, was Bobby in on creative meetings? How's his chemistry with Vince?
His chemistry with Vince was great, but no, he wasn't a part of creative meetings.
Swami wants to know, did Bobby ever have any influence or say as to who he managed?
Yeah, I mean, he had influence. He had say-so on the Brooklyn Brawler. He had some say-so on Barbarian. I think if Bobby didn't want to manage someone and had spoken up, that probably wouldn't have had to have done it. But Bobby was a team player and would look at things sometimes as a challenge.
Here's kind of a fun question. Fuzz wants to know, how was Bobby's relationship with Hulk backstage?
Great, because you know what? I mean, like I said, Bobby was Hulk's greatest foe, and they both made each other an awful lot of money. They had a lot of respect for each other's talent, and you wouldn't have one without the other.
Yo Mama wants to know, if Bobby had not had his illness, do you think he would have had a podcast today, and how big do you think it would have been?
It would be the biggest thing going. Bobby Heenan, I think that if Bobby had his voice, that when podcasts came out, that Bobby would be the king over Adam Carolla, Joe Rogan, and anybody else and I'm talking that level, that Bobby Heenan would have killed, because it would have been his forum.
Josh tweeted, I saw a video where Gorilla popped Bobby on air by saying, hot and cold rats on tap. Any other stories of those guys trying to pop each other on the commentary?
Constantly. Every single prime time, they were constantly trying to get the other one to break. And Gorilla had it where he could do the nervous laugh, not a nervous laugh, but where he could laugh at the brain and get away with laughing. When you go back and watch him, you'll see where Heenan will hit something and, Gorilla would go, oh, brain. But that was Gino's defense mechanism.
Dave wants to know, besides yourself, did Bobby mentor anyone?
God, Bobby mentored a lot of people. Pretty much every guy that he ever managed, he definitely mentored in some way or another. Jim Cornette, talks about his time, the times that he was able to get around Bobby and be able to pick Bobby's brain. But everybody that Bobby touched, from like Sean Mooney, commentators, guys that would come in, where Bobby would just explain to him, hey, it's not about you getting over, it's about you getting talent over. If Bobby touched you, man, he mentored you.
Was Bobby ever considered to manage The Undertaker?
No.
This is kind of a fun one here. Were there any times that Vince was pissed off at Bobby backstage at something he would have said on air?
No, because we the only live stuff that we ever did was pay-per-views, and Vince really didn't listen live, so there was really not that much to be pissed off, and the rest of the VOs were all tape. The only thing that I can ever remember him getting pissed off about was the Santa Claus thing, but that was more Piper jumping the gun than anything.
JBL Cena fan tweets, why didn't the advertised Coliseum video on Bobby Heenan ever come out?
I have no idea.
Jason wants to know, did anyone ever try to rib Heenan? And if so, would he sell it?
I'm sure Bobby got his share of ribs from time to time. I would turn the air off in the announce booth on him, things like that. But innocent stuff, nothing major.
A question here. What was Bobby's favorite adult beverage? Scotch and water?
Vodka.
Okay.
And beer.
Here's a fun question. Bulletproof wants to know, who was the guy that played Bobby Heenan's attorney, Lance Wilshire, the director in Old Tucson and many TNT characters? He was used a lot.
Oh God, he was just some character actor that Nelson Swegler liked to use.
David wants to know, what was bleeped out during the Heenan-Patera debate?
I have no idea. My God, it's 30 years ago.
Apparently there was a crawl underneath saying it was the decision of the producers to bleep it. I don't remember that at all.
I have no idea.
Ian wants to know, who made all of Bobby's outfits?
Bobby had a lot of stuff made by a woman, I believe, in Indianapolis. And the stuff that he had in later years, the spandex stuff, that was made by the same guy that made Randy Savage's outfits, Michael.
Jay Marsh wants to know, did Bobby and Vince ever butt heads? And if so, about what?
Not really. I mean, no, not that I can think of. The only thing I can ever, remember is just when Bobby got tired and Bobby wanted to get off the road, and they didn't butt heads as much as, Vince just kept putting him back out there, and Bobby just hit a wall.
Ken wants to know, what did Bobby find more creatively satisfying, managing or commentary?
Commentary.
Well, let's wrap it up, man. We've covered, I think, everything you can possibly cover on Bobby the Brain Heenan, but we've got that fantastic video. If you haven't checked it out already, really you owe it to yourself. It's facebook.com/something to wrestle. I'm sure this thing's going to get passed around. Chris McDonald has hit a home run with it. Of course, the inspiration for that was Matt Coon's audio cut last week. Hopefully you dug that. Next week, we have got In Your House Bad Blood coming your way. It's the October 1997 pay-per-view. Next Thursday is actually the 20-year anniversary. Lots of stuff going on that pay-per-view. If you've got a question, cruise on over to our Facebook or our Twitter and ask your questions there. It's facebook.com/something to wrestle, or Twitter. You can check us there at Prichard Show. And we need to give a quick shout out to everybody who came and checked us out last weekend. We were at the Regent Theater in Los Angeles. One of our best shows we ever had. Of course, shout out to our man Dave Silva for making the trek and taking care of us, making us look and sound good. And our shout out to our super fan, Scott, who helped us out with some great travel arrangements. Really appreciate your help there. And Bruce, you called out the big guns for our stage performance. One of our first questions from the audience was about Mae Young giving birth to a hand. And I'll be darned if Tommy Blancha wasn't there visiting. He's the former head writer who replaced Vince Russo on his way out. We talked all about the hand. Bruce actually told some stories as well that he doesn't want me to mention here. We even talked about the time that Stone Cold was ran down by a car and all the silly suggestions that came out of that. Tommy was awesome, and he is a part of the 10-Minute Podcast. If you haven't checked them out, please do. Next up to the stage, and this was kind of an unexpected surprise, Chavo Guerrero was there. He had a different opinion about the way things were when it came to the writers versus the wrestlers. It was a good time. Next up, we had Sean Waltman himself, the 1-2-3 Kid, X-Pac. If you haven't already, check out his awesome podcast, X-Pac 1-2-3-60. It's a phenomenal listen. He's a great guy who had way more stories than we ever imagined, and stuff I kind of couldn't believe he was talking about on stage. He brought his awesome dog Lula there. It was quite the spectacle. And then Will Sasso joined us with his incredible set of impressions. We had lots of fun with him doing different Hulk Hogan impressions, talking to the Macho Man and everything in between. He's also a part of the 10-Minute Podcast with Tommy. Check that one out. And then a real surprise, all of a sudden, Barry Blaustein, the director of Beyond the Mat, was there. He was checking things out. Charmel was hanging out. It was quite the star-studded cast for the live version of Something to Wrestle last week, Bruce. And I can't thank everybody enough for coming to check us out. And I should remind you, you haven't missed your chance, Detroit. You're going to get Jim Cornette live and in color, as Bruce likes to say. I don't know why he says that, but he does. And he's going to say...
Because we'll be live and in color.
There you go. That's going down, and it's happening next weekend. It's going to be here pretty fast, man. Check it out. It's right before Hell in a Cell. You don't want to miss it. That's shaping up to be a pretty fun card. But the real main event is when we've got a corny off. I'm pretty sure we'll get our burger order straight there. Jim's going to be there. Bruce is going to be there, and you should too. Pick up your tickets at boxofgimmicks.com. They're still on sale, but tickets are going fast. And if you're interested in hanging out with Bruce the night before and getting some private time to pick his brain, go ahead and check us out on Facebook. Dave Silva's got a post up there. He's doing a Prichard's Dirty Dozen. 12 lucky fans are going to get to hang out with Bruce for a couple hours, have a few drinks, eat some dinner, and pick Bruce's brain. And you can take part in this over at our Facebook page, facebook.com/something to wrestle. Bruce, did I get all of our plugs in, or is there anything else we want to mention before we get out of here?
BrucePrichard.com, but we're done, man. Let's go. I am absolutely spent. I got to apologize, man. I've been on an emotional roller coaster, and I rambled, but thank you guys for bearing with me, and then thanks for pulling me through it.
Say a prayer, ladies and gentlemen, for the Heenan family as Bobby gets laid to rest. By the time you're listening to this, it's probably happening. It's been quite the emotional week for Bruce. And I should mention, I don't know what we've given an update on this. Our Houston Relief t-shirt, where we're donating all the proceeds, that has raised thousands of dollars. And we sure would like for you to go ahead and sneak in a couple of more orders. Now, remember, not $1 of that comes to Bruce or I. 100% of that money goes to the relief efforts. Bruce, tell them specifically what charity that money's going to.
The charity for the Houston one is the Houston Food Group, and it goes out to help feed these people. That it goes to groups that go into areas where people have lost everything, and they set up, like in my area, it's at the Calvary Church, and they go up and they feed all these people that are homeless and that are still trying to rebuild, and they just don't have anything anymore. And we're also feeding all the workers and everything. So it goes to the Houston Food Bank, and it's a great charity. And that the other one went to the Red Cross, but this one is going to the Houston Food Bank.
So guys, please do go check it out. It's BrucePrichard.com. And I should mention, this shirt is a top seller over at Pro Wrestling Tees. And I don't know if you've ever checked out the top seller deal, but without exception, it's all Bullet Club, Young Bucks, Cody, Kenny Omega, whatever. But now all of a sudden, somehow, some way, Bruce Prichard has snuck in there with this Houston Relief shirt. Keep in mind now, 100% of that cash goes directly to the relief effort. Not $1 comes to us. And Bruce is still going to call and thank you. He is behind on calls, but he's going to get caught up, and you will too. Enjoy the archives. Follow us on Facebook. Like us on Twitter. One of those. You know what I'm saying. And we will see you next week right here for Something to Wrestle With. Bruce Prichard.
And here's your moment from the Something to Wrestle With Bruce Prichard archives. Episode 42, Jim Cornette.
So I had a barbecue at my house on a Sunday afternoon. Invited, I believe I had Jim and Jan Ross over, and Vince Russo and his wife and his two kids. Jim Cornette came. I fed Vince Russo's son VJ dog ice cream. You know, the Frosty Paws?
Yeah.
Yeah, we fed that to his youngest son, then convinced him after the fact that he was going to grow a tail and become a dog. Which to a 4 or 5-year-old, that's traumatic.
Your wife having dog ice cream does not surprise me. You convincing a child he's going to grow a tail also does not surprise me.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Business as usual at the Prichard household.
Business as usual at the Prichard household.
This moment from episode 42, Jim Cornette, and much, much more is available in the archives of Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Prichard.